And good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my channel and yours, Mike Schreiber Ministries, right here on YouTube. Computer kitchen on. Get some light up in the house. Computer kitchen on. And good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my channel and yours, Mike Schreiber Ministries, right here on YouTube. Looks like we got a Mr. Marco, the Honorable, if you will, Marco Rubio to address the committee about Trump's budget, apparently. Are you ready? Are you ready for the liberal assault? Are you ready to watch Marco Rubio? And if you go read my description, I don't know how many of you read my descriptions when I go live. Let's get that back on there. But I think he is going to navigate this gracefully. I think Marco Rubio, he might even have a better shot at being president than JD Vance by the time it's all said and done. JD doesn't express interest, at least at this point, in running for president. Time will tell. Okay, I'll be right back in a second. I got to go get a fresh shirt from the dryer. I put this on last evening and fell asleep with it on. Um, so I am going to go to my bathroom and get my other shirt and a beautiful Star Wars shirt by a dear sister got for me out of the kindness of her heart. And I'll be right back. Yeah, this is going to be good, Angela, no doubt. Any time is good with the Honorable Marco Rubio. At somewhere between 10:30 and 12:30 p.m. this morning, I'll have to just step aside for a phone call. And I'll just leave it running and put it in the hands of my great moderators that I am very proud of. They are the epitome of perfection, and I care about all of them deeply. There's something about faithfulness, something to be said about faithfulness to God above all things, uh, and then to one another, the best that we can under our circumstances. Uh, but any moment now, Marco Rubio is going to navigate, if you will, the assaults of liberals because there's going to be one or two in there that's going to just hammer it because not because it's Marco necessarily, but because it's Trump's agenda. And where there is a Donald Trump agenda, there is always a liberal assault team on standby. It's ridiculous. Whatever happened to American government supporting one another? They still had their differences, but the liberals are always so focused on get Trump, get Trump, get Trump that they can't see the forest through the trees. It's crazy. Liberalism is the scourge of America in politics, just like Islam is a scourge when it comes to religions. Both must be stopped, no matter the cost. Of course, not violently, unless necessary with the Second Amendment rights. But this is going to be good. This is going to be a very interesting, however many hours or a minute. Well, it's not probably going to take minutes, probably going to take hours. But watch as a very highly potential. The sky's the limit with this guy. Trump used to call him Little Marco. Apparently, he's short. And if he's short, I must be really short. 5'2" and 3/4. Um, and you take every inch you can get when you're short. But I'm perfectly fine with that. My shortness has never been a detriment to me. In fact, I've thrived with it, and I thank God for it. I outgrew my father. I outgrew my older brother, and he's my only full blood brother. I got several half brothers and sisters, but okay, we're getting ready to get Marco Rubio going here any minute. I'm gonna go change into my other shirt. God's gift to humanity, the cross of Christ, godly women, and coffee. I've been saying that for months now. All right, here we go. What's going on here? Let's go to settings, interact.
A distinguished alumni of this committee, and I know he's always glad to come back here and visit with us.
Make an adjustment here.
Marco, we haven't had this kind of excitement since you've been here last time. I know you think this is the way it is every time, but it's not. So, in any event, we're glad to have you.
Little Marco.
For the information of the committee, the secretary has 4 hearings in these 2 days, so we have negotiated a hard stop at 12:30. To that end, we'll use the usual array of the way we do things here, and that is, first of all, I will make an opening statement, and
How's
then
the missus?
I'll
Yeah.
yield to Senator Shaheen.
Oh, that voice
and
text.
then we'll turn the floor over to Senator Rubio. Then
And
we'll
she's
do a
Angela's so
5
quick at reading 'em.
minute
I
round
couldn't
of
go and
questions
adjust it
based
versus
on
seeing it. That's kind of funny.
arrival time. So with that, Secretary, it's good to see you here again.
Little Marco.
You're not on the Hill often.
Our
A
next
lot has
president.
changed, obviously, since the last time you testified on the President's International Affairs budget last year. The department has undergone a major reorganization,
Potentially.
making it
Our next
operate more efficiently and
Presidente
more in line with
is the-
America's
with
interests,
Spanish persuasion,
as
say.
we discussed before you even took the job, and that's been being executed, I think, quite well. At long last, foreign governments are being encouraged and, when necessary, pushed to live up to their responsibilities to respond to the needs of their own citizens. America will stand up by our allies and provide life-saving assistance to people in their hour of need, but we are not the world's ATM. And so the department is testing new ways of providing strategic assistance and breaking the cycle of dependence on aid. Renewed emphasis on trade over aid will help the American people and lift up countries around the world. This is American generosity and ingenuity in action. Through this budget, the administration is holding UN organizations to account, badly overdue, and alongside Ambassador Waltz, making sure American values are leading in international organizations. You've made securing the Western Hemisphere a top policy and budget priority and have successfully reduced illegal immigration at the southern border to the lowest level in half a century. That has not gone unnoticed. You've helped curb the trafficking of illegal fentanyl into the United States, saving countless lives. The budget prioritizes countering China's unfair trade practices, expanding military and malign influence operations around the world, and which pose some of the greatest threats in modern history to the American people. At the same time, you've been working to ensure these efforts are strategic, targeted, and effective, and we appreciate that. The administration has also taken care to ensure taxpayer dollars don't go to those who are able but unwilling to pay for their own defense. Through concerted effort by you and your colleagues, our NATO allies have increased their defense spending and have committed to reach the 5% by 2035.
Russia and
this
Ukraine,
is a major
man,
change
Russia
from the way you and I used to deal
Ukraine's
with this for the
capital
decade
of Kiev yesterday,
or more before
or overnight.
This. Together, we need to create a next-generation NATO that is stronger, more interoperable, and takes advantage of the industrial potential of American and European
which I don't know
economies.
if they have specifically.
We also must continue to coordinate with our
that's
European
pretty
partners as they take greater responsibility for supporting Ukraine and work with our partners to deny Russia strategic gains. The administration has prioritized efforts to end conflicts in Africa, which undermine decades of investment in economic growth and global health security. All is not well there.
Oh, China's got its
the Ebola
hands.
outbreak in eastern Congo, now affecting the entire region, highlights how conflict and humanitarian crises abroad
Africa. Some of those
threaten the
nations
health and
are
security
owned by
of the American
Africa,
people
from our
here at home.
understanding.
I know the department
sorry,
is working hard
owned
to
by
protect us
China.
from this threat, and I look forward to hearing how the budget supports these efforts. And, of course, the administration has
Welcome in,
taken
everybody.
decisive
Welcome
action to
in.
protect
Marco
American
Rubio is
citizens from
fixing
the
to be
threat posed
questioned.
by
I'm sure
Iranian
he's going to get
nuclear
hammered by the
capabilities
liberals.
and
And watch how
ambitions. On
gracefully
behalf of the
the
American
grace
people,
of a
thank you for your hard
Jedi
work on that. You and
fighting
I
a
have been through this
Sith
before,
Lord
and we know how difficult it
is
is.
how this is going to
Change is
be.
hard, but it is
Obi-Wan versus
also
Darth
necessary.
Maul. This is
Your
what
efforts
that
to make the
is.
State Department more responsive to the needs of Americans will help us all meet the challenges
Long
of the
live
21st
George
century.
Lucas Star
I look forward to
Wars.
discussing how the budget will
Not
further
Disney
those
Star Wars,
efforts.
although they did
With
have a
that,
couple
I will
winners.
turn it over to the distinguished ranking member, Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Secretary Rubio.
Good morning, Patty.
Mr. Secretary, you were a senator. You sat on this committee. You sat on the Intelligence Committee. You know as well as anyone that effective American foreign policy requires a strong partnership with Congress.
Who's she? Is she a
Allies
lib?
need to know that our commitments can stand the test of time, and that only happens if Congress is brought into the discussion. Congress cannot be a partner if it's kept in the dark.
Anybody looking forward to
I
listening
have
to
a
Blue Hair
long
this morning?
list of
Where's Blue Hair?
unanswered
She
requests
must be
sitting
there
on your
somewhere.
department's desk. And Mr. Chairman, I'd
Smurfette
like to
is in the
ask
house.
that these letters be submitted for the record.
They'll be submitted.
I've requested a briefing on changes to U.S. force posture in Europe, and after 33 days, we still have no response. We've
Yeah,
requested
Keith
a
got
briefing from the
nailed last
Iran
night.
war
Russia
on
hammered them.
displacement. After 90 days, we still have no response. We've asked for a briefing on Ukraine on a number of issues. After 180 days, we still have no response. We've asked for a briefing on lifting Milorad Dodik's sanctions. And after
It will
225
be,
days,
Patty.
we still
And
have
you know,
no response.
Patty, you're here.
We've asked
So
for a
it's
briefing for the
automatic
U.S. Agency for
gold.
Global Media.
And we're glad you're here.
No response after 344 days. The Romanian
God's
visa program termination.
decision. Good morning, good sir.
We've
How are you today?
Followed up 5 times over 435 days, and we've still gotten no response. In January, when you were before this committee, I asked if you would report to this committee once an audit system was in place to track Venezuelan oil revenues. You said, and I quote, "Oh, absolutely, yeah, we are still waiting." And when you do notify Congress, it's to inform us of decisions you have already made. That is not consultation, as you well know. That is not advice and consent.
You know,
Congress
I was
has been
thinking,
clear on a
I haven't
bipartisan
heard much
basis.
of
We do not want to cede ground to
this-
China.
What's his face?
Yet this
Well, now I'm drawing a
administration is
blank.
closing
It'll come
consulates
back
and
to me.
cutting funding in the Indo-Pacific. The same pattern
Cruz.
extends to global
We
health.
haven't heard much from Ted Cruz in recent
USAID
videos.
supported Ebola
lately.
detection and
Usually
prevention
I see him in
activities
my
in
feed, but
DRC and Uganda for years.
on YouTube.
And we can see in this poster, even Elon Musk admitted that one of the things we accidentally canceled, very briefly,
Don't
was
cancel
Ebola prevention.
Christmas.
Well, those programs were dismantled. And today we have to screen for Ebola at Dulles Airport rather than in the DRC and Uganda more than 7,000 miles away. You're asking for a 44% reduction in the State Department budget. That includes eliminating funding to the World Health Organization. It includes eliminating
doing
all
well this morning, God's
disease-specific
decisions.
funds
How are
in
you,
the
sir?
middle of an Ebola
yeah, you're
crisis
good.
that's affecting Americans. Yet, no one from your department can explain to us why this is a good idea.
Oh, she is a
You sent
libtard.
Congress one notification saying you needed $19 billion to close out USAID. Then you sent another saying you needed some of that money to respond to disease outbreaks. Congress has asked for an explanation, and we still have not received one. The same pattern extends to our alliances. I just returned from a bipartisan delegation to the Arctic.
Does that look better
We
that
are
I
on the
made her
verge
bigger
of
on
losing
screen, although she's
the very
annoying?
alliances that we have built for decades because the president manufactured a crisis over Greenland. And nowhere is that clearer than with Russia. In 2017, you
Oh, let me stop her right there. I can because I can, and I can because I care. It's insane. Does she not remember NATO doesn't let us use our own air bases, which your tax dollars, my tax dollars, if I was still working and not on SSDI, Our tax dollars went to pay for those bases. No wonder we want to pull out of NATO. My God. And NATO is weak. They are so weak without us, the USA.
You wrote, as a senator,
I got to
that
go get my
Vladimir
mail.
Putin will never be a trusted ally or a reliable, constructive partner.
And
But
neither were
since
the
taking
liberals.
office, you, the president, the vice president,
Traitors.
Steve
Every one of them.
Witkoff,
Traitors.
not one of you has been to Ukraine.
And what do we do with traitors?
And yet, your
I rest
envoys
my
talk to
case.
Putin on a regular basis. The
Treason.
president has invited him, given him the red carpet treatment
If
on
proven
American
in a court of
soil.
law.
But
of
yet,
course.
you won't come up here and brief Congress on any of it. And decisions Congress has made on Russia have been systematically undermined. Congress passed support for Ukraine. The administration has slow-walked it. And instead of sanctioning Russia, the administration issued oil licenses that have sent billions to Moscow. Congress has asked what this approach has produced. Russia has conducted 5 times more drone strikes on Ukraine since 2024.
They hammered them
More U.S.
yesterday or
businesses are being
overnight.
directly targeted than at any
6
point in this
ballistic
conflict.
missiles and
And Russia is
tons of
providing
drones.
targeting
Russia
intelligence to help
finally hit
Iran
Kyiv
hit
again.
our facilities and personnel in the Middle East, while we're helping them fund this war.
Okay.
When I talk to my constituents, they ask for economic relief at home, not regime change in Havana or Caracas or Tehran. Instead, you sent Congress a war powers notification saying we are not in active hostilities with Iran, while the U.S. was conducting strikes against Iran and Iran was bombing U.S. embassies and bases throughout the Middle East. That was not consultation. It was an attempt to avoid answering to this committee and this Congress about this war. Congress has asked basic questions about the war. Why are roughly half of our Patriot interceptor stockpiles gone? Why does the Strait of Hormuz remain closed? Why is gas up $1.50? Why did 13 American service members lose their lives in this war? Congress deserves to know why, and Americans deserve to know why. Mr. Secretary, you would not have stood for this kind of stonewalling by the administration when you were a senator, and you certainly shouldn't stand for it as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Thank you,
How
Mr.
quick
Chairman.
they
Thank you, Senator.
forgot.
We'll now proceed to
They
a
broke
round
the
of
ceasefire
5-minute questions.
90 minutes after it
sorry.
originally started. Iran
We'll
did.
try, well, did you want to, we talked about
Convenient.
that.
Do you want one?
We actually talked about that, but he thought that questioning might be easier. Why don't you go ahead
I
and
have it in writing. You want me to read it?
give us your best shot.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. There'll be a lot to talk about today, and I just want to remind everybody, you know, our foreign policy is one that's solely focused on the national interest of the United States of America, on the defense of our country, both its military defense and our security, but also our economic security and the vibrancy of our economy, our sovereignty, and our future. We believe that America should lead the world, and I believe that we are, and we'll have a very good story to tell about that. American leadership, however, should always be on behalf of the American interests. I say this because I think over a period of time in our foreign policy, we lost focus on that. The reality of it is that our foreign policy, first and foremost, must always be what is in the national interest of the United States of America. And determining the national interest oftentimes requires us to make pragmatic decisions. Sometimes in foreign policy, the choices are not between a good choice and a bad choice. It's between two less than ideal choices, and you're trying to figure out which one of these two choices is the one that is best for the United States and least harmful to our interests. And that plays out every single day. That said, we remain the world's sole global superpower, the most powerful country on earth. We have the largest economy. We have the most formidable and powerful military ever known to man, by the way. Our dollar remains the reserve currency of the world. Our language is used extensively throughout the world to transact all sorts of business and many of our engagements. But all of this means very little if that power is not used to protect the people who built it, the people who it is meant to protect. I also remind everybody the United States government is not a charity. We are not here to play social worker. We are here to win. We are here to win on behalf of the American people and on behalf of the national interest, to win for our country, to win for the people of America, to win for the things that are important for our future, and that's what we exist to do. The State Department exists to carry out the foreign policy of the United States, both in diplomacy and in aid, in a way that furthers the national interest and helps the American people. And it's guided every decision that's been made since January of 2025. I'll give you a perfect example is in our own Western Hemisphere, an area that this committee and many of its members long argued, as I did, has long been neglected and not been
Okay,
paid
we're
attention
back.
to. We now have in this hemisphere a coalition of friendly countries, over a dozen, who have aligned to work on not just the issues of security that we all have in common, but also economic prosperity that go hand in hand. It's an amazing story that basically, other than Nicaragua, other than Cuba, obviously other than Venezuela, remains with some challenges, and of course Brazil, although they're in the midst of an election cycle, and to some extent the current government in Colombia as well, at least the president's been problematic. But generally speaking, it is now a region filled with American allies, American-friendly leaders, and an America-friendly direction. Now, obviously, we have to operationalize that into action after 20 years of neglect, in which China and other global powers have intruded in our Western Hemisphere to the detriment not just of American national interest, but to the detriment, in our view, of the people of those countries as well. So these are important achievements, and one that I'm very happy about. I'm also happy about the way we've transformed foreign aid.
Amen.
In any transition, there will be, bumps in the road, but largely speaking, if you think about how those programs that
How many
existed
want
in the
me
past were
to
failing
get my
us,
catnip
the old model
and
had
watch
to be
the cats
replaced.
go crazy
And
again
the
like we
foreign
did that one
assistance that
day?
remains is being brought under the
Those cats
strategic
went
direction of the
nuts
State
over that
Department.
catnip.
So
I
we're
still
not just
got it,
providing
too.
money, we are also seeking outcomes.
Oh,
It's
there's
not
the
just
other
how much
cat. What do
money
you
you
want?
spend on a program,
I got
it's whether
both
you're
my
getting
girls here.
outcomes from it. But it's also being
All right,
guided
all right. Chill
with our
out.
strategic view
Amen.
in mind.
Where you going?
And that means that we are
Hey,
able to provide
yeah,
aid
there
not
we
just
go.
all
Come
over
on.
the world, but specifically targeted at those most in needs and those places around the world most important to the national interest of the United
Come on.
States.
Up.
That will remain our guiding principle.
girl.
That's been our
Who's a
guiding
good
principle
girl?
in our
Okay,
reforms.
Amen.
So,
right.
I would just,
Oh,
I mean,
she's going
we get
nuts.
into a lot of these
She's
details
going
in our
crazy.
questions. The bottom line is that all this and more is a reflection of this belief that I outlined at the outset, and that is that foreign policy cannot be separated from economic policy, from border policy, from energy policy,
Makes
from any of
sense.
these other spheres that are critical to our national interest. A country that cannot build ships or produce medicine or
She's going
control
to Chow
immigration
Town, guys.
or access vital resources
Going to
cannot defend its
Chow Town.
people, cannot defend its interests,
Sometimes
and cannot
she'll
defend
puke
its
it up
way of life.
if I give her
So
too
our
much.
foreign policy
She
continues
scarfs
to be
it like it's
reoriented
nothing.
around the real foundations of national
Oh, they love the
strength.
catnip bag, by
This
the way.
budget is yet
Oh,
another
yeah.
step, I believe, in that
Yep,
direction.
they were
Obviously,
so funny
the
inside of
appropriators
it.
here will have a huge say on the outcome of what that
Plus,
budget
we put
ultimately
extra
looks
catnip
like.
in it.
Oh,
man,
we don't
it was something to see.
anticipate that for the first time in modern history, Congress will just take up our budget and pass it. We think it'll go through some substantial
notice how a
reforms
cat
along the
eats?
way.
They'll
And
shake
we
their
look forward
head
to
really
engaging you
super
like we did
fast.
last year to produce what we think is a very good spending bill at that time. So anyways, I look forward to your questions. I think
This
that's what it
cat's my
says here. I'm not
cat.
sure if I
The
really
other
look
cat's
forward
my
to your
daughter's.
questions. I look forward to probably half your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Rubio. We will now
beautiful?
do a round of questions, 5-minute questions.
She does,
based
and
on order
she'll
of,
scarf those.
attendance.
That was an old
And,
bag
I'm
of
going to start,
snacks,
and I'm
but,
going to say thank you
Angela
for
got
the
my
work you've done
cats,
with respect to Ron.
really big
all of us
box
that
of
have
those
worked on this for
Temptations.
years
Although
know how
this is the only
frustrating
cat.
that
The other
is,
cat
how
won't
difficult
touch
it is
any
to work with this
treats. She's
regime
weird.
who've sponsored
weird.
terrorism, kidnapping, and killed thousands of Americans for the last 47 years. Thank you for doing something about it. I know you and the president are doing all you can
Oh,
to ensure
hey,
that
for late
this
night.
comes to a close sooner rather than later. I wonder if you could give us at least a brief update on
Actually, I'd
where
probably
we are.
use this.
Well, first, let me remind everybody that while I've not been before this committee since I believe
Cuts like a
February,
lightsaber. I
when we
love it.
briefed on the Venezuela operation, I have appeared on multiple
fish love it,
occasions
too.
here, both in my role as National Security
It ends
Advisor
their
and
suffering.
Secretary of State, and both all Senate briefings multiple times, Gang of 8 briefings, Gang of 16 briefings. So we've talked about this topic with some of you in those settings in the past that you've heard from us. Let me just lay the predicate here, okay? Iran's desire to build a nuclear weapon was going to be effectuated behind a conventional shield. They were going to build for themselves so many missiles, so many drones, so many conventional weapons, including a navy, that at that point there's nothing you could do about it. What they tried to do is they were going to try to build a conventional shield and hide behind that conventional shield and basically say to the world, if you come and do anything about our nuclear program, we will overwhelm you with missiles, we will overwhelm you with drones, and we will overwhelm you with our Navy, and you will not win. you will not be able to do anything about it. They were seeking that point of immunity, which is why the president chose to act, to deny them that point of immunity.
Jaded, how you doing
Operation
this
Epic
morning,
Fury,
girl?
some of you
How
didn't
you
like it,
feeling?
some
Are
of you
you
did.
getting more
was
and more
highly
better every
successful
day?
in achieving its military objectives, which is dramatically reducing the defense industrial base of Iran. The ability to build these missiles and to build these drones, especially the missiles program, substantially degraded. A
tell you
substantial
what,
percentage, and I'll leave
when
the
I start
exact numbers
dating
to the
again
Department of War,
sometime,
because I'm not a general and I'm not here to speak
these
as
ladies
a
are going to be
military planner,
questioning
but a
the
substantial
potential new
degradation in the number of
misses.
launchers that they have as well. They
course,
still
that
have a
could
lot
be
of drones
20
because
years
these
away.
are easy to make.
I'll
We
be
all know
70.
it's not an Iran challenge. This is a global challenge, and it's playing out every single day around the world. I mean, Mexican cartels are using UAVs against each other. We should imagine at some point may even use it against our own, against our interest. So this is a pervasive problem around the
It is
world. The
time.
economics of it
I
are
need to
something we
start
have to
listening.
solve for. But nonetheless, even their drone building capability has been eroded. Today, there is no Iranian Navy. There is no such thing. There's a bunch of Boston whalers with machine guns on them, but there is no Navy. There is no Iranian Navy. It lies at the bottom of the ocean and will soon, within a number of years, be prime fishing spots because they'll turn into reefs. So my whole point is that the Iranian conventional shield has been substantially eroded. Now, in the aftermath of that, two things have happened. The first is they entered into a ceasefire. They agreed, we agreed to stop. But part of that agreement was that they would reopen the straits. They did not, at which point the president decided, and I think appropriately, we can't have a world in which only Iranian ships get through the straits. And so if they're going to shut down the straits for everybody, we're going to shut down the straits for them. And we have done that through a very effective blockade and, by the way, through the seizure of sanctioned ships in the Indo-Pacific as well. The cost to Iran every single day in lost revenue is in the hundreds of millions of dollars that they are losing in lost revenue that they're not generating as a result of that. Now, we are in talks, and I say talks because talks with Iran are not like talks with Switzerland, okay? They're very different. They require the use of intermediaries, unfortunately. But there is the prospect before us, which could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen next week, that for the first time, certainly in my memory, they have agreed to negotiate aspects of their nuclear program that just a month ago, just a year ago, they were refusing to even mention, much less enter into discussions about. That is not a guarantee that ultimately it will lead to a deal that's acceptable to the Senate or acceptable to the American people. But we'll be able to engage them in a process to truly test the proposition of how far they're willing to go. Complicating that process, unfortunately, is their internal regime is somewhat fractured in the sense of it takes days to get responses from their system. We can go into more depth in your follow-up questions. But we're hopeful that something like that could happen in which the straits would reopen, we would enter into a period of negotiations on very specific topics, delineated negotiations, in the hope of reaching an outcome that's acceptable to us and something that they would be able to do as well. If it doesn't work out, then obviously we still have a problem with respect to their nuclear ambitions. But what they won't have is the conventional shield to hide behind any longer.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm going to ask one more question. Hopefully this will shorten as we go around. There'll be more questions, obviously, on that topic. But I know you just got back from China not long ago. Could you give us a
We
quick
do
update
love
on
Marco.
the
Marco is
state of,
highly
US
respected on this
China
channel.
relations?
Yeah, look, I mean, China and the United
If I
States
ever
are the two
grow
largest
up,
economies
I'm
in the
gonna be
world, the
just
two most
like
powerful
Marco Rubio.
militaries in the world. The Chinese government and the
Yeah,
U.S.
hey,
government have to speak.
Fitness Connect.
I
God
mean,
bless you
really,
for
it's not a
joining us
choice here.
today.
We
good
have
to
to
have
have
you
some
with us.
measure of communication, if for nothing else, in order to de-escalate potential points of conflict that could lead to something broader. There are obviously very significant irritants in our relationship with China. Some of these are long-term problems that we know we're going to have to address.
Check out a sweet
And so what we're
car.
trying to do is manage a period of strategic stability while recognizing that there are areas of our relationship
Sanders,
in which we
Legends
are
of the
going to have
Chrome.
struggles, not just for years, but perhaps for decades. We recognize this. But I think as much as anything else, we have to recognize that the United States and China have to be able to have points of dialogue and speak to one another. As I said, for no other reason than to be able to have a communication channel. I think in our meetings, it was abundantly clear which are the areas that we do not have strong alignment or agreement on. We understand that there are areas in which long-term we're going to
Thank you
have some
for
real
playing.
challenges.
My
whether it's
biology
supply
teacher
chains.
in high school
Put
used
it
to
to you
say
this
that
way.
when he
Let's leave
quizzed us
China aside
before
for
a
a moment.
test.
The United States, and I would argue the world, cannot depend on one country for 90% of anything, especially
exactly
90%
right.
of things that are
That's
critical
exactly
to
right,
our
Brother
economies, to
Marco.
our, not from our weapons
Little
systems to our
Marco.
pharmaceuticals. We just can't live in a world in which we rely on anybody for 90% of what we get in one sole source that could be cut off at any time as leverage against us or punishment or in a time of conflict. And so we are actively searching and have plans in place, and we're implementing these to diversify where we get critical minerals, where we get our supply chain, secure that supply chain.
And we better thank
obviously
God
the
that
Chinese
President
would like
Trump
to retain
is having
their
pharmaceutical
monopoly position in
companies
some
come
of
into
these.
the United
This is going to
States
be a
to make our
long-term issue that
medicines
we're going to
that
have
we
to
need.
continue to confront
Instead
and
of
work
relying
on. Work
on
that
China, because
continues,
once we do go to war,
even
once the
while we are
enterprise is
engaged in
built
the ability to dialogue and speak
delivered
to
in
them, because we
2030,
have to. It's responsible. We truly have no choice
we
but
will
to be able
lose
to
a
do
lot
that.
of
It's to their
medications
benefit
for
and ours,
people that need
and I
them
would
for,
argue
like,
to the benefit of
diabetes
the
or
world
whatever.
that these two countries are able to speak
And
to
we
one
got to
another.
be ready to take care
Thank
of our own
you,
people.
Secretary. And I think your comments about the supply chain and the critical minerals and everything else that's in the bottleneck, these are things that are relatively new to us. They've always been there, but COVID underscored that. And then, of course, the Ukraine war brought it out even more.
How many want
And
Marco
appreciate
for
your remarks.
president
I think everybody
over
at this dais
J.D.
knows
Vance? Which one do you
we are,
prefer?
as a nation, looking
You
at
want
that.
J.D.
With that, Senator Shaheen.
Or do you want little Marco?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which I love. I think Marco's awesome.
Mr. Secretary, at this budget hearing last year, you testified that no one had died as a result of foreign aid cuts. Sadly, I think we're seeing in real time that that's not true today. There are more than 1,000 cases, more than 200 Ebola-related
Yeah,
deaths.
I had heard
And
something about that. A
as
lot
we
of our
know,
nation's meds are made in New Jersey.
one of the entities that is a critical global health tool is GAVE.
Thank you guys for joining us today.
Particularly during
It's nice
a
to have
disease outbreak.
respectable people.
It plays a role
join
in
us for the
distributing
first time.
Ebola vaccines, and it has
And not
committed up to
jerks.
$40
Because
million
we fire
to
them.
develop a
We don't
vaccine for
tolerate
the
too
current
much of
Ebola
them.
strain that has no vaccine right now.
I mean, unless
So-
I'm preaching or teaching.
How are you making
But
sure that
they're so
Secretary
insulting.
Kennedy, who has been sitting on those funds for months now, is going to release them so that they can go to help develop a vaccine to address the Ebola outbreak?
Yeah. Well, a couple points on Gavi. I would say that the president had asked that we allow Secretary Kennedy to play a leading role on the Gavi decision because of his strongly held views with regards to vaccine safety, and he wanted them to conduct some reforms. I actually talked to Senator Schatz about this last week as well, and so the State Department's
Anthony,
going
yeah,
to be
I
re-engaging.
agree.
I'm
I
not here to
agree.
tell you
I
we're
think
gonna
I would
yank
take
this thing,
Marco
and
over
we're not gonna
JD because
listen to his
JD's not
points of view, but the
expressing,
State
at least at
Department
this
will-
point,
is-
much
a
interest.
few weeks ago made the decision that we were going to re-engage on this issue of Gavi, respecting, what HHS
If he
views
wants to
on
be
it are as
VP
well. and we
again,
wanna take
maybe
their
he could
input,
be
but we'd like
Vance's
to get
VP,
this
or
issue
the other
resolved
way
in
around
an
is
outcome
perfect
that's
with me.
acceptable, both to Congress and also to
I'm
our
51 years
goals on
old.
global
I've seen a
health.
lot of
So,
presidents come and
It is
go.
an issue, as I said,
And
I wouldn't use the
Trump
word
is the
defer, but we
best,
have certainly
and his
allowed him
protege,
to play a
I
leading
think, would do
role
a
in
fantastic
determining what we're
job.
going to do next. But right
But
now, we're
history will
sort of
be
at
the
a
judge
stage
of
where
that,
we are going to re-engage.
if it
We need to
happens.
drive this to an outcome.
I couldn't agree more, and so do you commit to using the $2 billion that Congress has appropriated for global health to actually help fund global health security?
Well, we do fund global health security beyond Gavi, by the way, and we can talk about that. We can talk about the compacts, I think 32 that we've now entered into with countries all over the world. We have a new agreement with the UN as well that they're very happy with. The Global Fund, we've hit our cap. We are at our 33%, and we've actually been able to attract additional donors from around the world to contribute to it. On this specific item, I would say, we intend to get this resolved. We want to get this resolved. It's an
Good.
important
Thank
part of
you.
our matrix.
We will follow up, and I hope you will share with this committee as soon as you get it resolved. I want to go to Russian oil sanctions and general licenses, because President Trump gave Russia a lifeline, allowing it to sell oil globally through licenses issued by the Treasury Department. While I think the administration should have known that the Iran war would make Russian oil more desirable, they decided to remove the stigma on that oil and give an extra windfall of cash to Putin. So can you let us know whether you believe, or whether you will support extending those licenses, when it comes back up mid-June?
Yeah, a couple points. First of all, the two things have happened. The one is actually the U.S. production and U.S. playing a role in the global energy supply has increased. I think we had our largest amount of exports from the United States we've ever seen. So we've also benefited from this, and our energy dominance has really come into play. The Russian waivers were a decision. These are the policy, the underlying policy remains on the sanctions. What has changed is these time-limited extensions to sort
Thank
of
you
try
for
to
noticing
Right,
me being
alleviate the
muted.
global, right. But the problem we're facing too is there's a contagion potential. And that is that at some
Overnight,
point, we
Russia
can do strategic
hammered
reserves. We can
Ukraine
do some of
with,
the
I think,
other
6
things that we've done to
ballistic
sort of
missiles.
alleviate global supply. But at some point, you have to ensure, this is not so much for us. At the end of the day, our economy is not in need of it, but there are other economies around the world that have benefited from this. So these are time-limited extensions that
Well,
ultimately at
we've
some point
certainly
will expire.
benefited China and Russia's economy.
Well, China doesn't, I mean, China refines oil. They import a lot, but they refine oil. And
But they also benefit from Russian oil. But my question for you is, can you commit not to extend the general license again when it expires on June 17th?
Well, that ultimately is a decision that's made by Treasury, but I will tell you, it depends on the circumstances at the time. We would like to end it as soon as we possibly can because the underlying policy of this country has been to sanction their oil. These are time-limited waivers for the purpose of opening up more global supply.
I understand that, but if we continue to extend them, they're not time-limited. I want to get a final question in on food for peace because, as you know, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has deepened the humanitarian needs in food insecure countries such as Sudan, South Sudan. And yet, in your opening statement, you said that our aid targets those who are most in need. But I think it's very concerning that the country selection process for Food for Peace, which I understand is led by the Department of State, includes only 2 priority countries from World Food Program hunger hotspots. That's Haiti and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the question I have is, why are we adding countries that aren't facing acute food insecurity, like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Rwanda? Why are we not helping countries who are facing acute, well, famine in some cases? Sudan, Gaza, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Syria, Somalia. These are all countries that have humanitarian crises, and yet we're helping countries that don't have acute food
Yeah. No,
security.
so a couple points. First of all, on Gaza, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, including after the ceasefire, and providing through the World Food Program and other entities, and we continue to do so. I think if we're not the world's largest donor, I'd be surprised because it's a massive amount of money that we've provided through those mechanisms of various means. On the point of Sudan in particular, the complication in Sudan, which I wish were different, and we're very involved in this. I mean, I had a meeting on Sudan yesterday. The problem in Sudan has largely not been our unwillingness to provide funds. We are willing to step forward, and we have the flexibility through what we've been able to do with foreign aid to surge up that. It's been distribution. It's been the ability to get that. So as an example, in these conversations we're having between the warring sides, one of the things we're trying to identify is 4 safe spots where people can go receive humanitarian care, assistance, where we can actually have the outside groups, the NGOs, international organizations that we contract
being a
with,
father.
have the ability to go in and
Absolutely
actually
love it.
deliver the
I
food
do.
without having their trucks hijacked or
It's
blown
the
up or
best thing
their
that ever
workers
happened to my
killed.
adult life.
That's been the
And
fundamental
really,
challenge
5
in
kids were
Sudan
the
is
easiest thing
distribution.
about my
The
adult life.
distribution is being threatened because we
That's
don't have
no
conditions on the
exaggeration,
ground that
it's
allow
true.
for it. And so to allocate money towards something that we can't distribute is unwise until we have that in place. That's deeply tied to the ability to have a peace deal, which I can tell you has been very frustrating. On the one hand, with Sudan, we had a donor conference in Berlin.
I don't
in
want to
April.
interrupt you, Mr. Secretary, but I'm out of time,
I
and
don't
it
wanna
doesn't
interrupt you.
explain why we are providing
Yeah, sure you
food
don't.
for countries that are not insecure. I appreciate the challenges in Sudan. We have those challenges in many places, but because we have dismantled the distribution network when we eliminated USAID, we've exacerbated those challenges in countries around the world, and we are not providing the help based on humanitarian needs, and that's my concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ricketts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary of State, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Good to see you. Communist China is trying to win the AI race.
Yeah,
And
God's
they will
decision,
use
you're
it,
so
for
right.
example,
They
to
got some crazy
dominate
policies.
our military if they're able to do that.
And
so
really,
many other
they're
ways.
demonic.
A world
There's
where
no doubt about it.
Communist China is dominant in AI is very bad for the United States and for the entire world. That's why it's
Listen, there is something that, for those of you that are new to my channel, this is a Christian ministry channel above all things. But there's something called the fivefold ministry of the left that the Lord dropped in my brain a few months back. The liberals got 5 things they support. They're pro abortion regardless. They are LGBTQ plus A through Z alphabet community supporters, and we do not hate them. They are DEI, they are wokeism, and they're pro illegal immigration. If the Bible has the fivefold ministry, and it does, then liberalism has a counterfeit to all of it, or a evil fivefold ministry. And if you don't support one of the fivefold ministry of liberalism or of the left, even if you don't support just one, they don't consider you a human American. If you don't agree with their stupid agenda, anti-American, what? Where in God's name did these people come from? They are the chosen
Critical that
people.
us and our allies
Also, we're spiritually Jewish. I'm a Jew, and I'm proud of it in the spirit. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he said, I am the vine, and you are the branches. In Acts chapter 10, the Cornelius' household, they were baptized in Jesus' name, filled with the Holy Ghost. They were speaking in tongues. I didn't write the book. Don't get mad at me. And they were baptized in Jesus. So they're baptized in Jesus' name. They got the remission of sins. They were filled with the Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues. And obviously, you got to repent before you can receive the Holy Ghost. And so, yeah. Anyway, let's get back to this. The
cannot lose this.
actually, no, it's not. The Gentiles in Acts chapter 10. It wasn't until Acts chapter 10 that the Gentiles, non-Jews, that's what that means, were grafted into the vine of Christ. So spiritually speaking, Christians are spiritual Jews. Okay, get back
This
to it.
race. Semiconductor supply chains, particularly semiconductor manufacturing equipment, SMEs, are critical to winning this competition. It's one area that Beijing is spending billions and billions of dollars to be able to produce chips in China, and they've failed to be able to produce those high-end chips so far.
Thank God Doritos
President
aren't
Trump
made in
understands
China.
this better than anyone
Chips in
because the
China.
Trump administration was the first to utilize export controls on SMEs to slow down Communist China's advanced chip-making industry. Since that time, key allies and partners have also imposed controls on SMEs to China. However, their controls have not been as restrictive as U.S. controls, and this has allowed certain foreign countries to backfill the Chinese market with critical dual-use tools.
I would agree, Jews rock,
Secretary
on
Rubio, do you
the
agree that export controls on SMEs are critical
fact that
to
they
maintaining our
live in the
technological
Old
advantage
Testament
over
in their
Communist China?
minds?
It is. It's actually
But
where it's most critical is in the high end. The
there are
areas,
Christian
that are not
Jews,
legacy,
though.
that are broader
They
than,
are
and that allow for
precious.
that. I think on the broader point of AI, we share your view. One of the initiatives that I think
Now, as far as
Jacob
Israel as
Halper's
an
done a great
ally,
job with at the State
we
Department
really
is
need
Pax
their help
Silicon,
at
which we
times.
signed up
And
all these
as they
countries
need
around the
us,
world. I think we're up
it's
to
an
13
ally
or 14,
partnership.
including ourselves and others who hope to join as well, in which we can create this global consortium. For
Hey guys,
all
don't
of the
forget to
elements of the
subscribe if you would, please. We
AI
would definitely
supply,
appreciate it. Get that free Palestine
needs. It's not
garbage out
just
of
the
my
innovation,
chat.
it's obviously
Get out!
access to the minerals and the critical elements
Bring
necessary
that
in order to
garbage in
produce
here.
these chips and all the things that it will take to lead the world in AI. I think it is safe to say the United States right now is a global leader on AI. I think it is also wise to say that that lead is not irreversible.
permanent.
It has to be sustained, and there will be a real challenge in sustaining it. And we're going to have to stay focused on it. The good news is I do think we have a system of global alliances that view it the way we do. And we want to lead on it because it's not just about leading the technology in
I don't
AI. It's
either.
about also leading in the standards that will
Where we're
govern how
at, there's
AI
no
is used.
specific Jewish
I don't want to
community to my
monopolize this
knowledge.
conversation on this point, but
But
it's
if
one
there
that I think
was,
the
I
Senate
would
should
be
think
good friends
about,
with them.
because I know we're starting to think about it. AI
Messianic
will have very
Jews. I think
positive
that's
impacts
how they refer to it, as
on our
Messianic
economy and
Jews.
societies. It will also have some detriments. It will there will be white-collar jobs in this country that will be impacted. And I think we have to start thinking not simply about the impact that AI will have on those jobs, but the societal pressures that will create, not just in the United States, but in economies all over the world. Much like industrialization and automation did, it will make the worker more efficient and more valuable, but it will eliminate some jobs, and those jobs will have to be replaced with new jobs or new skills. That's not just an economic issue. That is a political issue. That, over time, could destabilize societies all over the world. So we have to start thinking about AI in those terms as well.
You mentioned our allies. Shouldn't they have to follow the same sort of standards U.S. companies do when we're limiting the amount of,
What do you want?
limiting the semi-manufacturing equipment that's going to Communist China?
And that's our hope, is that we can create people that we can create a coalition of
everybody.
nations that understand the
I am the
danger of
tail.
this. And they're running through the
How
same.
are you doing
Some are
today?
better than others, but they're running through the same problems that we run
Hey,
into.
stop
and that
rubbing
is
against my
companies
monitor. You're
ultimately
gonna drop it on
want
the
to
floor.
sell to the markets,
outta here.
and China's
Go.
a large market. But I
Shoo.
agree, and that's
Shoo.
one of the
In
goals
the name of
behind
my mother,
Silica,
shoo.
is to create unanimity
That's what she would say,
or
my mom would.
consensus
Shoo,
behind that
shoo.
thinking.
Well, Mr. Secretary, that's why I recently introduced the Match Act with Senators Kim, Risch, and Schumer to level the playing field. This bill would provide the State Department with the leverage in ongoing negotiations with our allies to align those controls.
so
And if
142,
agreement cannot be reached, it would ensure that
182.
foreign companies cannot sell the very choke point technologies that we have restricted. So I hope you'll support that as
And don't
we,
forget to
move
smash
forward
that
on it.
thumbs up button. All the cool
One other
people are
thing I just
smashing
wanna
it, and
hit
you
before
should
my
too, right
time
here on
runs out
Mike Shriver
is
Ministries.
that I was the co-sponsor of a bill to create the U.S. Foundation for National Security and Counterterrorism. This is a foundation that would be a public-private partnership. It would help
Angela,
counter
can you do me a
traffickers and
favor, dear,
insurgents
and
operating in
put up my
ungoverned
link
spaces
to
around
my
the
new
developing world,
channel?
such as Africa. The
I
State Department, however, has not,
definitely intend on starting it sometime this
over a
coming
year and a half now,
weekend,
launched this
either
foundation.
Friday, Saturday, or
And I'd
Sunday.
encourage you to work expeditiously to
Friday,
implement it.
we
I think
should
this
have
is
Pastor
something that,
Kreitz
if we're
as a
talking
special
about
guest,
especially the continent of Africa, would be
and
very helpful to
Stephen Bard
making sure
and
that we're
his
not only
friend,
helping
and we're
conserve
going to
the environment,
discuss
helping
the
animals, it's bad for
tulip
terrorists.
doctrine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And look at that, I kept it in my time.
Good job.
Hey,
Can you do as well,
I'm proud
Senator?
of him.
Do my best. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You need to go,
thank
honey.
you, Mr.
I'm-
Secretary, for
I'm
being
sorting
with
cards.
us
Get outta
today.
here.
Despite the differences that existed between Republicans and Democrats prior to this administration on how to approach Iran's nuclear program, the theory was basically the same, that we were going to impose significant harm on the Iranian economy in order to force them to the table to negotiate. What is happening now is
Why
fundamentally
are we negotiating
different.
with terrorists?
This
It is
war
not
and
our
the
policy.
administration's decision
go
to
to the
blockade
Christian conservative
has
voice.
now held the
Connect to me.
entire world economy and the U.S. economy hostage to the ability to negotiate an agreement with Iran. This is why the entire country is seized by the question of when there will be an agreement, because apparently, until there is an agreement, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. There is a cost to the Iranian economy, but now there is a devastating cost to the U.S. economy. It has been indecipherable.
Oh, Angela, that
The
link's not
information
working.
coming from the administration,
when I click it, it just goes to
especially in the
your,
past several weeks, as we get signals that a
channel.
deal is
not
imminent. The
your
president said
direct
yesterday
YouTube
he's
channel
bored
for
by
your
the
song, but your
negotiations. He
personal.
doesn't care whether we
I
get
got it here
a deal.
somewhere.
Wait for a picture.
I think it's really important for us to understand what your bottom lines are, what you're asking for in this negotiation, what commitments you need Iran to make in order for you to release the blockade, and we hope for them to release the blockade as well.
If I disappear, guys,
So
it's because I got
give
a
us a
phone
little
call I got to
insight
deal with.
into what your bottom lines are, what is going to
189.
get the strait reopened, because this is kind of the only question that matters for American consumers right now. And every day we get wildly different signals from the president as to whether he even is engaged in this question as to whether the strait is going to reopen.
Yeah, I think your question gets right to the heart of the matter. So I think it's a good question. Let me first bifurcate two things. The only reason there's a blockade,
Today's Mike
the only
Shriver
reason why there's a
Ministries
US
word of the
blockade
week
because
is bifurcate.
Iran has closed they're firing on commercial ships, and they've mined large segments of Hormuz international waters.
Is that
and so
related
the
to
blockade is
defecate?
only against Iranian ships, and it's very simple. The notion is if no one's ships are going to get out, then Iran's ships aren't going to get out either. We can't live in a world in which they get to close the straits and tell everybody, pay us a toll or we'll blow you up, but their ships get to go out unfettered. So that's the reason why there's a blockade. There wouldn't have been a blockade if Iran had agreed to do what they said they would do when the ceasefire kicked in, which is they were going to open the straits. So let me just focus on the straits for a moment. Number one, what they're doing is unlawful and illegal. There isn't a country on earth, other than Iran, and maybe Oman that flirted with it, who's in favor of what Iran is doing in the Straits. The Chinese are
Thank
against
you for
it.
the
The Russians are
$5 super
against it.
chat,
Everyone
my
is against it.
good
The whole
sister from
world is
another
against it. So
mister.
condition number one is they have
Or
to
no, that's
reopen the Straits.
Troy.
And
That's
reopening the
Troy. I'm
Straits
sorry.
means the following. Ships can
I
sail
thought
through
that was you,
international
Angela.
waters the
Hold
way
on
they
a
can
minute.
do through other choke points around the world without being
Per policy of the channel, if I happen to catch the super chat in time, sometimes if I'm preaching or teaching, I don't pay attention to my chat whatsoever for 20 or 30 minutes. Um, but Patty, thank you for the $5. Um, all of you are amazing people, whether you donate to this channel or not. And I appreciate you guys showing up every day for me. And actually, you're showing up for the Lord, but I'm just a messenger boy. Uh, I might look like the crypt keeper, but I love the Lord and I love all of you. Thank you for that $5. Um, oh, it's okay. We're glad you're back, Angela. That's what matters. You keep coming back home to Mike Shriver Ministries right here on YouTube.
fired upon
Thank you
without
again,
paying a
Patty.
toll. That's condition number one.
But the Strait is closed because of our decision to invade Iran. This is a
Man, I
consequence
didn't want to
of our
sell
military
these,
action. So I
but
guess
I
I'm
got
not
a
interested
choice,
in
man.
litigating that question. We all know why the Strait
gotta
is
sell
closed
'em.
because you took military action against Iran, and we knew ahead of time that that would be their likely response. The
Pokemon
question is,
cards.
how are we going to get it reopened? Are you going to drive a
I
bargain
hardly ever get a
that
chance
is
to buy
so
any.
tough and so hard that the Strait remains closed?
But I got
So
a lot
how
that
are
I
we
need
going to
to
get it
sell, and
open?
they don't
The
sell
first
for
thing,
much
that
at
is a
all. Not
predicate to
really.
anything else happening. The
What do you
Straits have
want?
to be reopened. So the way to think about it is this. If Iran wants to be able to move its oil again through the Strait, they will have to
Pat,
reopen the
you are.
Straits. If they refuse to do so, then we have other options available to us, but we would prefer to negotiate the
You
opening
think you
of
own this table,
which
don't
means
you,
Tell
the
us
Pat?
about the negotiations. What do you need from them in order to get the Strait reopened? We need the Strait reopened tomorrow.
Well, what needs to happen is very simple. They need to announce that they will no longer fire on commercial ships that are going through or threaten to fire on ships, because in many cases, ships just won't move. They won't go, not because they got fired on, but because of the risk of being fired upon.
Right.
And so they have to
Exactly.
announce very clearly, the Straits are now open. We're not charging a toll. We will help remove the mines that they put in there, and they will not fire on ships.
But the
that go
president
through.
says they also need to make commitments on their nuclear program. That's what I'm asking. What?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
What
Okay.
commitments do they need to make in order for the Strait to be reopened?
Well, the
and for our
second thing they have to
blockade
agree
again?
to as part of this is, so in addition to the Straits, that's the predicate that opens the door to phase two. Phase two is they have to commit to very specific negotiations on highly enriched, the disposition of the highly enriched uranium that still is buried deep in a mountain somewhere. They have to agree on negotiating severe and long-term limitations and or cancellation of enrichment activity in their country.
In the second phase of negotiations.
Well, obviously, these are highly technical matters, so I don't think you could work those out in 5 days. That would require a team of experts to meet over a 30, 60, 90-day period and work out the details. But they have to commit to their willingness to do that. For example, they have to commit to say, we will dispose of the enriched uranium, and the question now is, what are the mechanisms by which we do so? That can be negotiated.
Final question. In order to get to that second phase, are you willing to release sanctions or release frozen money that the United States is withholding from Iran?
Right now, everything that's been discussed with them is that any sanctions relief. Now, remember, sanctions come. There's international sanctions, there's congressional sanctions, there's executive sanctions. So some we can
God's
release
decision,
and some we cannot.
that is so
but
true.
Any sanctions
That
relief
is
is
very,
condition-based,
very,
which
very
means it
true.
has to be in return for the
Guys,
reason
don't
why those
forget to
sanctions were put in place
subscribe.
in the first
Hit
place,
that
which is
thumbs up
their
button.
nuclear program. So yeah, look, Iran is being sanctioned because they enrich uranium. Iran is being sanctioned because
Okay, so I got a brand new YouTube channel. I haven't even done the first official episode on it yet. It's called The Christian Conservative Voice. All news, all politics. I'm not in any way going to neglect my ministry. That's the call of God on my life. That has to be my primary. If you're new here, I'm going to put the link up to it. I want you to join me when I take it live. It is right here uh, at the Christian Conservative Voice. Oops, no space there. Forgot. All right, that's my new channel. A lot of people were requesting I keep politics and news separate. Um, And so I am going to do so. We're going to try it out and see how it goes. And I'm going to make sure this link works. I mess up links all the time when I type them. Okay. That's why I check them, because there it is. 35 subscribers so far, but I got 5,000 subscribers here. Shouldn't take me long to get those 5,000 transferred over, but you know how it goes. Some people subscribe to your channel just to be kind, to help you grow, which is much appreciated. All right, let's get back to Marco.
Because they've highly enriched uranium. Iran is being sanctioned because of their nuclear activities. If they agree to give up those things, there will be sanctions relief associated with their commitment and compliance
You will not get
with those
sanctions
agreements.
relief just in exchange for reopening the strait.
No, that's not been discussed. That's not been offered.
Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Rubio, it's good to see you here. I want to commend you and the administration for actually implementing a foreign policy that advances America's interests. Thank you. If we could, I'd like to start with the Philippines, an area that we know very well. It's a geographic center of the Indo-Pacific region. It's an area that is along critical sea lanes where a tremendous amount of world trade and energy commerce actually move. A strong alliance with the Philippines clearly is in U.S. national security interest. It leads and supports our freedom of navigation. It
And
also
bingo
helps us
was
deliver
his
regional stability
name-o.
along the South China Sea, a very critical area, particularly in the face of a very aggressive posture that the Chinese have adopted. I want to recognize my colleague, Senator Kaine, who's worked with me to put in place the Philippines Enhanced Resilience Act. That's $500 million of FMF grants. It's $1 billion of loan guarantees per year to strengthen the Philippines and the United States alliance to make us more interoperable and more capable.
I would agree.
Mr. Secretary, I'd just like to get your comments, your vision on the role of the Philippines in the United States alliance.
It's actually, I spoke to President
Teaching
Marcos
of
on
history.
Sunday. And
In
I've
especially
had
liberal
multiple
states,
engagements with them at a personal level. We've had
things
visits.
are
A couple
left
good
out,
points here. The
or
first
things
is
are
we've
added.
actually entered into
For
agreement
example,
with
the
them, in which
1619
I believe it's an
program.
old U.S. military facility
That's a bunch
inside
of
the
hot
Philippines that
garbage.
will now serve as sort of a, I think it's a 4,000
The United
acre,
States wasn't even a
I'm very
nation
familiar with
then.
the area.
Yeah, you know it, and that we'll be able to do a lot of our
And they try to blame us
activities
for
together
starting
with
slavery
regards
in
to our joint interests
1619.
in developing on AI and high tech and diversifying and helping diversify their economy. The second is to continue with our defense commitments that we've made to them and the ability to interoperate joint exercises, which we've done now multiple times over the last year.
Oh,
Obviously, we're
Patty,
very
I doubt
concerned with
very
Scarborough.
many.
We've seen in recent days, and we've demarched and made a very
Unfortunately.
clear note. This issue came up during the first meeting with the Chinese. It's come up in every engagement I've had with the Chinese, and it's come up again now very recently through diplomatic channels, and that is we're very concerned about recent activity once again near Scarborough and the buildup of infrastructure that appears to be exerting, territorial claims that we have long argued are not valid. This is one of those irritants in the long term that I think we'll continue to have to manage. But I view the Philippines as a critical partner, and I think over the last, I would say, couple of years, our relationship with them, particularly under their new administration, has dramatically improved our ability to work with the Philippines jointly on a number of topics of interest.
Well, I want to commend you. The 4,000-acre Luzon corridor is anchored by the Subic Bay project, which, when I was ambassador to Japan, worked very hard to get that back for America. And I see that as a tremendous opportunity for us to deepen our economic ties. And of course, that has, as you mentioned earlier, tremendous national security.
Yeah, can I just add one point? There is, some desire during their chairmanship this year of ASEAN that to reach a sort of code of conduct understanding in the Indo-Pacific. And while I understand that desire, I just want you to know, and perhaps many of you can help us in making this point.
I love the
a
discussion
bad
in
code
the
of
chat,
conduct
guys. I appreciate you guys talking to
agreement
one another.
is worse than no code of conduct agreement at all, and I think that's very important.
wonder how
because
fast
they
I'm
are
gonna
under
kick you out of
withering
my channel,
constant
you
pressure
hack.
in the region to
Thank
agree
you, Angela.
to a code of conduct in the region that I think would be detrimental, would set a precedent that I think is very dangerous in the law. So we'd love to see one, but it has to be a good one. We don't think that's possible under current conditions, and a
I love
bad
how
one
they
is
try to
worse than
insult
none
me.
at all.
Your point's very well taken.
Just rolls
Look
off
forward
my
to working with
back,
the team,
and I just
Mr.
kick 'em out.
Secretary, to advance that. Can I turn to another issue of concern, and again, it's joint concern? Senator Kaine and I both worked on this, and that is the actions that have been taken by countries that have been perceived as our allies against U.S. business interests and against U.S. investments in their country.
In fact, I am
Particularly,
waiting
I'd like
for
to
my
point to
phone
the
call right
example of
now to
Vulcan
get back on my
Materials.
food card.
That's a situation where a U.S. company put billions of dollars of investment investment into the Yucatan Peninsula, both in port facilities and in quarrying operations, only to be confiscated by the Mexican government. Then the Mexican government came back in arrears, by the way, retroactively tried to justify this taking as some sort of environmental move. Sadly, we had to fight pretty hard, the previous administration, to not allow this to happen. And I think it's going to take more bipartisan effort, certainly you'll have it from here in Congress, to push back on any government's effort to try to confiscate American corporate property. What that will do is have the effect of minimizing or basically reducing the incentive or de-incentivizing our foreign investment in other countries, which again I think hurts the mission that you're on. I'd love to get your perspective on how the State Department will stand up for American investments overseas.
We do every day, and in fact, one of the great benefits of our reorganization is that it has empowered the regional bureaus. You know, you used to have a set-aside economic bureaus that would do these things separately from the missions in the field, and having been a former ambassador, perhaps you experienced that. We've now empowered the regional bureaus, and through it, by extension, the embassies, to play a leading role in economic diplomacy. And so I would argue that virtually every engagement I have with a foreign leader involves some economic component to it. Right. And I would say if you talk to our chargés and our ambassadors around the world, I would say more than 50% of their engagements now have to do with economic matters, and they involve one of two things. Either A, finding creative opportunities. In essence, the host country will say to them, we have these areas, these industries of investment. And the embassies will take an active role working with the Bureau to identify American companies who could potentially go down there and see if there's an opportunity for them. And the second is what you just pointed to, and that is protecting existing American investments. Because the point we make with everyone we interact with is you can't ask for American investment into your countries when you have a history of expropriating, of takings, and in some cases, it's a local official that's trying to extort an American business and say, hey, I'm the sheriff or I'm the local police officer. If you don't pay us, your workers won't show up to work tomorrow. We have problems like that as well around the world that involve the local level, and it's become a leading part of our diplomacy. And it's happening at the embassy level, which is where I think it really needs to be led.
That's where your field generals are, and I applaud the sea change, and you know you've got support on a bipartisan basis here in the Congress to move this forward. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Hagerty. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Senator Hagerty for mentioning our work together in Philippines
Michigan.
and Mexico. Mr. Secretary, you won't be surprised that I'm going to ask you about the Western Hemisphere. You and I traded the gavel and the ranking on the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee when you were on this committee, and that was good, productive work. I want to ask you about Operation Southern Spear, the operation to strike boats in the Pacific and the Caribbean that dozens of operations have now killed more than 200 people. Have you been involved as Secretary of State or National Security Advisor in discussion about the targeting criteria that are used to decide which boats we should strike?
Why would he be involved
No, but
in
not
that?
because I've avoided it, but because those are largely legal decisions, right? So you have,
But if you haven't been involved in discussion, as the National Security Advisor, are you aware of what the targeting criteria are?
yeah, I mean, they go through, so every strike has a legal officer on the deck that has to make a determination about whether the call is legal or not. And this is done by the Department of War, the way it's been done in other theaters around the world.
Here's what I want to ask you about. So you're generally aware of the targeting criteria. I'm
But
not
you
allowed.
keep trying,
I know
Patty,
what the
you'll
targeting
get one.
criteria are
I
because of
don't even get
briefings
them
I've had in this
sometime.
committee and the Armed Services Committee. It's
And
all
I
been
am a
classified.
master at
And I'm not
moderation.
allowed to discuss the targeting criteria
Pat,
because they've
you-
only been shared and classified.
No.
But I don't think I'm prohibited
Go
from
away.
describing things that aren't targeting
Say
criteria.
hello.
So I'll give you an
Now
obvious
say
example.
goodbye.
Everyone on the boat is right-handed. That's not a targeting criteria.
That's what
It
she
would be
wants.
ridiculous.
Everyone on the boat is what? I didn't.
Everybody on the boat is right-handed. That's not a targeting criteria. It's obviously not a
left-handed.
targeting criteria.
What's your point?
It would be improper for it to be a targeting criteria. Here's one that's not so obvious and that
Right,
surprised
now
me.
there's your snacks. Go away.
There's evidence of narcotics on the boat. That is not a targeting criteria. I have been briefed on Southern Spear since the first operation on September 2 and most recently within the last couple of weeks, and I've asked again and again.
Amen, Angela.
Have the targeting
Amen.
criteria changed? No, they have not. What are the criteria? Here's what they are. I can't describe it here. But the presence of narcotics on the boat has never been a targeting criteria. Would you have any ability to explain? And the administration could have picked that as a targeting criteria. They chose items that were targets. that authorize the use of the U.S. military to sink boats and kill people.
So is he
but they
complaining
have not
about our
used the
children
presence
and
of
even
narcotics on the
adults
boat
not
as
getting
one of the
drugs
targeting
now
criteria.
because
And I would
we're
suggest to
sinking
my
these
colleagues,
ships
if you
or
go look at
boats?
the individual files of all the
Are
strikes,
the
and I've looked
liberals
at the first
complaining?
46, they are consistent with what I've just said about something that's not on the list of targeting criteria. Why
We're
would the
spiritual Jews,
administration
Alex.
not include
spiritual
the
Jews.
presence
We're
of
grafted
narcotics
into
on
the
boat
vine of Christ
as a targeting criteria
Gentiles.
on Operation Southern Spear?
As
We
you
were
just outlined,
grafted
I
in,
can't
and
discuss the
you gotta
specifics
you
of the
gotta
targeting
understand that
criteria,
concept.
but I can tell you the one thing that is obvious is that the targeting criteria is not single source.
I'm
In essence,
100%
there are
American.
multiple checks.
There are
multiple.
Spiritually,
three
I'm
elements to
Jewish.
the targeting criteria.
As
right?
a
And
Jew, Christian,
all of it
Christian
informed and
Jew.
infused by intelligence collection. In essence, they have to have true links. I can tell you they do walk away from strikes. There are multiple times that I've been aware. I'm not aware of every strike because it's not reported on a
Well,
regular basis, it's delegated.
yeah.
But there have been strikes that they've walked away from because it doesn't meet the criteria or because there's doubts.
I'm not saying that the strikes that I've reviewed don't meet the targeting criteria, but I'm saying how odd it is,
What is he
especially since the administration always announced this is against narco traffickers. We've attacked narco traffickers. How odd it is that the presence of narcotics on a boat is not one of the targeting criteria. And I would encourage my colleagues, get the same briefing I've gotten, take a look at the strike files. You'll be as surprised as I am. Here's the second question. Again, in your dual role, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. The administration's Operation Southern Spear, we could agree with it or not, but the administration presented a legal opinion from the DOJ that we could review. Absolute resolve, the effort against Maduro. The administration presented a legal rationale that we could review. Now, we could review both in classified. They've not been made public. We're 92 days into a war against Iran, and the administration will not let Congress look at the OLC legal opinion justifying the war. Intel committee members, SFRC members, Armed Services Committee
Well,
members.
how do you trust
rank and
liberals
file
with that
members,
kind
the
of information?
administration
They're so
will not make it
anti-Trump.
available to us.
I
Now,
don't blame
you
them.
can imagine, A,
Who
we're
would?
the Oversight Committee. B, you're here asking for a budget, and in the Armed Services Committee, they're asking for $1.5 trillion, an increase of 40% over last year's budget, but won't let us see the legal opinion. And Mr. Secretary, you know what kind of thinking we do. If you've showed us the legal rationale for 2 wars, and you won't show us the legal rationale for the third, is there something in the rationale they don't want us to see? Is there a dissenting opinion that says it's not legal? Are there conditions like you can't strike civilian infrastructure like schools and bridges? Are there factual assertions like the war will be over in 2 days?
That school was not hit on
Iran will
purpose
never
if
close
we
the Straits
even
of
hit it.
Hormuz?
I think it's still
By
under
not
investigation.
sharing the legal opinion with the Article I Oversight Branch, you give us the opinion that there's something in there you don't want us to see. Could you use your influence
You
as
wanna
the
talk
President's
about-
Chief National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, NSA, to get the administration to share the Iran war legal opinion with Congress?
All right, here in a few minutes, I'm getting a
Look,
phone call
first of
I
all,
got to take care of.
obviously,
So
the Department
I'll
of State does not
disappear.
develop the
Moderators,
legal
keep the
opinion.
chat
It's
But
going.
you're
Office
the
of
national,
Legal Counsel.
you're the Chief National.
So I think what you're asking is why haven't the Office of Legal Counsel provided it? They don't work for the National Security
I'm
Council.
actually
They don't work for
asking,
me.
will you use your influence as
Well, I will
President's
certainly
Chief
inquire as to
National
why,
Security
here's what I'll do.
Advisor?
I can certainly inquire as to why it has not been available. I don't think there's a reason why.
Yeah, you see how they wanna
I am not
control
aware that.
him?
In fact, my understanding is they have provided documentation to the committee and.
Not the opinion.
As part of the war.
Not the opinion.
Well, that's
And-
different.
And you wouldn't accept that.
All right, well, let
if
me
you were
take
sitting
that
on
back
this
and ask
side
the
of
Office of
dais.
Legal Counsel. But it's certainly, they provided the legal rationale for the strike. You're asking for the actual written opinion, the way it was
Which
in the
they
other.
provided us
All
in
right, I
Southern
understand.
Spear and Absolute Resolve.
I'll
Thanks,
take
Mr.
that
Chair.
back.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Secretary Rubio, for being.
You look like Ricketts. I apologize. This threw me off a second.
Well, look, bald is beautiful, and we
new caucus.
can't help that. But thanks for all of your efforts. You are a very effective spokesperson for not only President Trump and the administration, but for the United States, and I'm grateful for that. Was wondering at the outset if you could talk to us a little bit about the fractured Iranian regime and how that might be making negotiations more difficult. One of the things I've wondered, for example, are whether the diplomatic Iranian channels are sort of crosswise, at odds with, or working hand in glove with the IRGC, which is itself causing a lot of these ceasefire violations, or is it all sort of coordinated chaos to try to undermine and tip the scales in favor of Iran in the negotiations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me try to give this answer to you in a way that's not boring or wonky, because it's been a shift. Obviously, the original Supreme Leader, the one that was there, is no longer with us. His son takes over. Nobody hears from him for a month. By all reports, open source reporting, I think you've all seen it. He was severely injured in the same strike, and so forth.
Are you confident he's still alive, by the way?
Yeah, I think there's indications that, in fact, we've not heard from him publicly. We haven't seen him publicly, and I would imagine, given what's happened to multiple leaders in that system, being very public is probably not something that's recommended for them internally. But that said, I think there are indications out there that he is increasingly engaging at some level, although all of his communications have been in writing and through intermediaries. So the way to think about it is the following. You have the Supreme Leader, and understand that at the end of the day, the Supreme Leader in their system there really is no analogy to it in our system or anybody else's system. It is a theological office. It was the head of the Islamic republic in the sense of the ultimate decision maker. And every major decision has to be run by them. They are advised by a council. It's not clear if it's 6 people or 8 people, but there is a council made up of both IRGC and other elements of the regime that surround that Supreme Leader. And ultimately, that council has to sign off on anything. And then there are the people you see on TV, like Arachi, who's out there every single day, and Golubov, who's the Speaker of the Majils, who's been playing a pretty prominent role. And they are the ones that they have sent to negotiations and so forth. It is our view of the system, as we understand it, and as it's been expressed to us both by the intermediaries and by Iran directly, that what Arachi and Golubov bring or take from us, they then have to run back to this council and ultimately get guidance from them. And that process oftentimes takes 3 to 5 days to get a response. Now, some of it is logistical. They're operating probably using couriers and things of this nature. Part of it is internal fissures on exactly what they should agree to or not agree to. I think the second point that needs to be driven in this regard is that there is evidence that there are communications issues within the regime as well. So, for example, it's pretty clear that at the outset of hostilities in the conflict, they had delegated decision-making to field commanders. And so oftentimes field commanders had delegated authority to act on let's say, a pre-operational planning that already put in place. And so unlike our system, where perhaps you know that the president or the secretary of war is directly making orders and decisions, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in their system, a lot of decision-making at the tactical level, like which ships to hit and so forth, are being made at the commander level. So that's
why from the outset it can look like fire-ready aim, but it's part of the design of the system, perhaps?
Well, I think it was a design of the system in the sense of regime survival and the ability to operate in case there was decapitation strikes or people are removed. But let's go back to the essence of the negotiations. What's complicated them is you ultimately are negotiating with people who then have to negotiate within their own system to see what they're allowed to give and what they're allowed to agree to. What is abundantly clear is that Iran is facing severe internal economic. All the problems Iran had before this conflict not only are still there, but they're worse. All the things that led to the protests, all of these are worse than they were before. And I think there's definitely elements within that regime that understand it. And then there are other elements of it that are more immune to it and perhaps more resistant to making agreements. And so what we are working through is in many cases, is delays in getting the responses to people. And this is why you see reporting about there might be a deal in the next few days, because internally it takes time to get responses from them, sometimes upward to 5 or 6 days.
Undoubtedly, they're using that to their advantage, sort of like the car dealer where the salesman has to go talk to his manager and make you wait and think about it for a while.
Even more complicated than that.
Even more complicated than that. One more question. I think we could benefit from hearing from you about the need to zero out funding for a couple of entities, including the National Endowment for Democracy and USADF. Can you tell us about that?
Well, look, these programs, I think, have served a purpose in the past, and obviously there's a congressional role to play here, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these programs have had, especially the National Endowment for Democracy, has had support in Congress in the past. And look, I was here for 16 years. I understand that you're going to pass an appropriations bill, and the appropriations bill is going to have things in it that we don't have in ours. That's just the way it is. And we understand it. We'll make it work. But we are concerned, or have been concerned in the past, about organizations that sort of have lost their purpose and what they're advancing. And at the end of the day, look, we have a lot of resources. The United States is the richest country in the world. We have the largest government budget in the world, but we don't have unlimited resources. We still have to be able to strategically spend our money. And the State Department, when I took over, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a mess. State Department's not that big. The majority of our employees are local hires overseas. We have, foreign service officers, career civil servants, but compared to some of these other agencies that are out there, we're not that large, and yet we have a global footprint. We're really, other than the department, I would say beyond the Department of War, we're the only ones that are present almost everywhere on the planet. So we have limited resources, and we have to be able to allocate those resources in ways that are driven by the core mission of advancing our national security. And oftentimes that will mean that things we have paid for in the past, we can't continue to fund because there are other things. It might be good, but there might be something else that's more important and even better. Other cases, we may still spend money on a purpose, but we want to be driven not just by, we don't want to be judged just by how much money we're spending on something.
Tony
We also want
Tone
outcomes
is
for it.
in the
We want to
house.
show outcomes.
Tony,
That's been
it's
the
good to
goal
see you
behind
again, my
these,
friend. I hope I didn't blow
MOUs,
your guys'
these
ears out.
compacts with the 32 countries that we've entered into.
Yeah,
And
the
we've-
volume was low.
Is
It's
we're
okay.
not just
Good to
trying
see
to
you,
solve the
Tony.
disease problem this year.
How
We're
is
trying to
everything
build the
going with
local
your
capacity
family?
So that 5 years from now, they won't need aid anymore because their local systems can handle it.
We've been praying
Saying
for
5
Tony's
years, some
family
countries may take 10 years.
when they're on the
But
channel and
nonetheless,
praying
that's
for
the
them
goal, and it's been
otherwise.
very well received.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
We're glad
Senator
you're here,
Murphy.
Tony. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Give us
and
an update,
Secretary.
sir.
Good to see you.
If you would, please.
As Senator Shaheen noted, you've expressed that no one died as a result of the sudden shutdown of
got more than
AID. And I did ask you last time you were here about that, and I won't repeat all that, but I want to note that the folks who study this at the schools of public health, the Harvard Chen School, the Boston University School of Public Health, estimate that over 500,000 children have died from that sudden shutdown. I want to kind of put a note on that. If you were to walk across this country, you'd see one dead child equivalent every roughly 30 feet. That's the level of carnage. I know you disagree with that, but many experts who are in this field
Okay, who
that
are
is
the experts?
Their estimate, and I hope
Who's the experts?
you'll
Where's
ponder
the
that
names?
as we strive to rebuild.
Okay, so she is recovering
our
well
programs
then, Tony?
related to malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS, HIV, nutrition,
Under the
and certainly infectious
circumstances,
diseases
that's-
like Ebola.
She just went
I
through
wanted to
a
turn
head-on
though
collision,
to
Tony's sister.
Taiwan. It's an area that you and I worked on quite a bit together. When you were here, including the Taiwan Relations Reinforcement Act and the Transnational Repression Policy Act, the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office Certification Act. And I'm very concerned about the President's comments
His sister's got a long
on
road,
his
I
recent
bet.
trip. He noted
Awesome,
that
Tony. Thank Jesus.
arms sales to Taiwan are a, quote, very good
Thank God it was her
negotiating
will
chip.
to, or his will to
And when he was
live.
asked about how
for
much
her
he
to
talked
live.
about arms sales with China,
his will for her to
he
live. That's
said, we
amazing.
discussed arms sales, quote, in great detail. The 6 assurances
see,
included that
that's the
arms
thing.
sales
We
to
don't
Taiwan
pray,
would never
Lord,
be
thy
a
will be
negotiating
done.
chip. My concern is that the
We gotta
President
pray that.
now
And
has
in
kind of
Jesus' name,
accentuated
everything we do in
the
word
arms
and or
sales
deed,
by
do all
not
in the name of
approving,
Jesus.
not putting the stamp of approval and completing the arms sale that Congress has already funded. That this sets a stage for China to very much proceed to pursue more aggressively their effort to incorporate
no war
Taiwan,
with China until the
into
Enterprise
broader,
is in the fleet again.
framework
in
of China,
2030.
including extinguishing
CVN 80.
Taiwan's
A
democracy.
beast.
So I'd just like to hear
The
your
first
thoughts. Hopefully
aircraft
there's a
carrier
path here that
ever
will
built
re-accentuate our
using
support
only
for
digital
Taiwan's
blueprints.
democracy.
Thank
Not
you. That's an
paper.
important question. So let me first say on
The other
Taiwan,
four
and
had
I actually think I
blueprints.
made this point myself, either on the trip in China or thereafter when we returned. There's been no change to U.S. policy towards Taiwan. I think there's, obviously the Chinese side would like to see a change in the verbiage, but no change has been made in that regard. The second point I would make is, I believe in December, I know in December of this year, we did approve an arms sales, I think $11 billion. I think it's the single largest arms
Yeah.
sale ever. It was a huge
Yeah,
sale
my
to
children
Taiwan.
were
This
the
was just
greatest
last December.
accomplishment of my life.
I think
And
it's
to
more
be
than the
honest,
totality of the 4
one of
years
the
under the Biden
easiest
administration.
things, and I got 5
And I would
kids.
recall that there were a 6-year period of time under the Obama administration where there were no sales to
Yeah,
Taiwan.
he is a moron,
There is a
isn't he,
second
Angela?
pending sale, which I think is
Not
the one
Rubio,
you're
but
referring
the guy
to. It's
questioning
the
him.
$14 billion one, and that remains under review. And but we just did one in December, so I don't think it's, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but I don't think it's fair to say that the U.S. is not providing. We just had a massive arms sales, and it was so big and so noticeable that the Chinese became very aggressive about it and some of the incursions they undertook as a result of it. And as I said, it was more in one sale than we did in the entirety of the Biden administration, if I'm
Wow,
correct.
that's
and I
gotta be
think
a
I am
lot
on
of
that
money
point.
we raked in
So,
there.
but the most important thing to understand is we want to
Absolutely.
see the status quo
We'll stop
preserved
and pray
as it
right now.
is at
That's
this
what we
moment.
do. I've
That's our
already thought
policy.
about
That's
doing
what
it.
we've
We're going to pray for Tony Tone's sister right now. I don't care about politics. This is primarily a Christian ministry channel. And we pray for one another here. Tony's sister got into a head-on collision, drunk driver, and she took a lot of damage and a lot of fear, a lot of, yeah, you can do a prayer request, Jade, if you have one. And we're going to pray in Jesus' name that your sister will continue a speedy recovery and that God's will be done in her life on earth as it is in heaven. Heavenly Father, we come before you in the name of Jesus Christ. Lord, you said in your word, everything we do in word or deed, we do all of it in the name of Jesus Christ. So, Lord, we ask you, God, to touch Tony's own sister. Not just her body's damage, but the emotional trauma that comes with seeing basically a speeding bullet right at you in the form of a drunk driver. Heal the wounds of the body, but also touch her mind. I was in a head on collision, Lord. You remember, you were there. And I understand to an extent, although it was only 25 miles an hour, I understand the fear of seeing something coming at you and you have to brace for impact the best that you can. So, Lord, right now, in Jesus' name, heal her mind, her soul, and her body, and help her, God, to give you the glory in all things. We ask your will be done in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Amen. Amen. There you go, buddy. Keep the faith. Remember, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of the unseen.
said. That's what we continue to say. It's a very, as you know, a very delicate relationship to balance. But our policy on Taiwan is not changing and did not change on this trip.
Yes, amen and
Another
amen.
issue
And
that
guys, please subscribe to
you
the
and I worked on
channel.
was the
We
Uyghur
are
Forced Labor
growing at
Prevention
an
Act. And
unprecedented
it's really
rate,
been the most
thanks to the
effective
grace of Christ.
strategy for saying that products produced by slave labor will not be admitted into the United States. And we've turned down a lot of products from China, but then they're transshipped, often just into Canada. It would be a far more effective policy if Mexico, Canada, and Europe were to join us. Is that an objective you can pursue in your role?
It is, and as you said, it's an enforcement challenge. I think the initial enforcement was easier because it was more straightforward. I think the transshipment issue makes it harder because it requires more paperwork, more due diligence, and frankly, in many cases, some of it is obscured. But I want to make this point. There's clearly a humanitarian aspect to it. There's clearly a humane aspect to forced labor, which is horrifying. Separate but related, there's an economic aspect to it. It is also, unfair competition for our companies to have to compete against someone who has free labor, basically compelled and forced labor. So we've made the argument on two fronts. Not just is this immoral, but it is and horrific, but it's also an enormous economic disadvantage, not just for us, but for companies all over the world. As you can imagine, depending on the country, some are more willing to lean in on these issues than others. I think just yesterday, last week, the foreign minister of China was visiting Canada, and where they sort of announced, or at least put out the prospect of how Canada can export more to China next year. That was the carrot. What we don't know in those, and I'm not blaming Canada, I'm just saying in general, they do this all over the world. There's a stick associated with it. And I would imagine that China's putting, I know that they put tremendous amount of pressures on countries around the world not to comply with restrictions like the ones we put. I agree. If we got Canada and Mexico to agree, given our current trade arrangements, it would make it far more effective. To date, we have not been successful at convincing them that they should do that because, among other things, I think they fear retribution. But we certainly will continue to raise it because we think it harms them.
Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to see you again. You opened by talking about
American leadership and American interests. And later this month, the G7 is going to be meeting in France, and then next month, NATO meeting in Turkey. Just overview, what are the priorities you're going to go into those meetings with?
G7?
G7 and NATO, yeah, coming up next month in this. Yeah.
Well, NATO would be a fun meeting. Let's start with the G7 one. The G7 forum this year has largely been focused, obviously, because of the Straits. So when I went to the foreign ministers meeting in March, a lot of the conversations in April were about the Straits. And the one point we've made is, and what's interesting is a lot of the countries involved there, even though it's not a military forum per se, the UK and France are members of it, they've put together this initiative, which they say they will send minesweepers and escort ships, but they will do so once hostilities is ended. It's kind of a catch-22. On the one hand, I mean, why do you need naval escorts if no one's shooting at the ships? That said, I don't diminish the utility of it, because I would imagine the first few ships to go through are going to like to be escorted. So I think that's going to be a key feature of that conversation. I think there's a shared interest in all these countries on rare earth minerals and supply chains generally. I think there is a growing
Going through the
global
Straits right now
consensus,
is like
and
a
we had
fish
great,
in a barrel.
Maybe a few of you had
Very
attended part of it.
dangerous.
We had a great ministerial here earlier this year on rare earths and supply chains that brought in dozens of countries, and all the G7 countries were represented at it. And so I think that's going to be a feature here is how do we diversify the global supply chain on anything from rare earths to pharmaceuticals? There's growing consensus, so I think that point will be quite dominant. And then given the makeup of who's in the G7, the Russia-Ukraine conflict will always come up, because obviously it directly impacts at least 3 or 4 of those members who are on the continent.
I am awful at leaving my
so
microphone
we will also,
up. I'm
and I
terrible
don't
at it.
recall exactly who the French have invited, but in addition to the G7, they'll always invite 2 or 3 other countries to attend. I believe Ukraine has been invited, if I'm not
bird
mistaken.
just ran into my
There's
window.
usually a couple other countries that they'll invite
But he
that
was
are not
okay,
members of
because
G7.
he's up in the tree.
But I think those issues will dominate
You don't
depending
see
on
that
where we
very
are
often.
with the Straits, and then clearly the critical minerals and supply chains.
Hopefully the
has been a
magnetic
key
core of the
focus
Earth is okay.
G7 actions. The last point is, I think there's been an interest in and I think Canada deserves credit for this. The Canadians have really taken a lead, and we've been very supportive of this, in highlighting places like Haiti. And as a result
Canada
of these
taking the
G7
lead,
meetings,
that's
we've
awesome.
actually had a number of countries in the G7, including Japan, step up and
We
contribute.
love our Canadian
to
neighbors
the,
here.
to the effort there.
That's why we
And the
wanted to be
reason I
part of the
mentioned
United
NATO,
States.
There's an article in The Hill, and Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that we put this in the record. It says Sweden is now America's most valuable tech ally. You're talking about working together with other countries. It goes on to say, this is just last week, Sweden joined NATO. They've now signed the bilateral defense cooperation agreement. They said in March, Sweden became the first European Union member state to sign the Pax Silica Declaration, Washington's flagship initiative to secure global AI and semiconductor supply chains, and now the
He said
technology
flagship, I
prosperity
immediately thought about
deal.
Star
I wonder
Trek
how,
and the
how you've
Enterprise, the
accomplished so
flagship
much,
fleet.
and is this a model for U.S. relationships going forward with NATO?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Sweden is because they, and Finland to the equal extent, is because they were not members of NATO for many, many years, they had a self-sufficiency in their defenses. And so now that they've joined, they've actually added to the equation. I'm not here to beat up on any specific country, but generally speaking, the countries you added to NATO were countries that needed from NATO. Sweden and Finland have actually contributed because they brought their own defense industry, their own advanced technologies. So they've been a great partner. They've been an extraordinary partner. We were just there because we had the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Sweden, and it was phenomenal. And I think that Sweden is a great ally and a country that we're continuing to find a lot of synergy and cooperation with, especially on the field of technology, but also on defense. I mean, they have their own defense industrial base, which is an impressive
You'd be
defense
foolish not to
industrial
ally
base.
with
I wish
the
every
United
country in
States.
NATO
You really
had what
would
they
be.
have, but I understand why Sweden
Spain
has
is making a mistake.
The,
Italy is making a
travels
mistake.
that a number of members
France,
have done
Germany,
in
they're all
bipartisan
making
ways. We
mistakes
found
when it
out as
comes
we go
to
around
this.
Europe that most countries will say they've been too dependent on the United States for military, too dependent on Russia for energy, and too dependent on China for materials. This administration has really made these nations step up to do what they need to do in terms of putting the money forward in defense. So I want to know what the next concrete steps we can do in terms of making some of the pledges of moving from 2% to 5%, making sure that they deploy the military capabilities.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, some countries are on track to do that, others are not. Let me just speak about it in general terms. There's a real challenge. On the one hand, they've made these pledges that they're going to increase their defense spending and their defense capability. It actually has to be on defense. That's the first thing. You can't say that pensions
Saying it, doing
for
it's two
former
different
soldiers
things,
and
you know what I'm
sailors
saying?
is part of your 5% or your 3.5.
Are you
And
getting
that
hungry
can't
because I said a
happen.
bird ran
But the
into my
bigger
window?
challenge that much of Europe faces,
Dan
many
Brellen, welcome
countries
to
in
Mike
NATO
Shriver
faces,
Ministries
their
right
economies
here
are not growing.
on
And in
YouTube. Did
order
we
to
get
spend
any
more
new
money on
subscribers
defense,
today?
they're going
Here's
to
what
either
we're
have to
going to do.
raise taxes
We're
or
going to do
cut
a
social
poll.
programs.
I like polls.
And
Polls
part
are
of the
fun.
reality of NATO, whether we like to hear it or not, is
I've
that
been getting away
many
from
of the
this.
countries in Europe were able to build these very robust social safety nets because they didn't have to spend it on defense because NATO and the United States was providing it for it. So they're going to have to deal with that reality. The second point is, and this is not an anti-NATO statement, but it is the reality. The United States has global obligations. At the same time as I'm in NATO, I have to speak to the Indo-Pacific countries who are also worried about what's our force posture they're going to be. We obviously are involved in the Middle East. We have counterterrorism issues with regards to Africa. We have growing mill-to-mill cooperation in our own Western Hemisphere, especially taking on these transnational terrorist organizations and the like. So we don't have like unlimited military resources, even though we have a very large budget. They're not unlimited. And so we have to be able to allocate our resources and our personnel in ways that make sense, and it has to come at the expense of something. And so I think that's the reality that we have shared with our NATO partners from the very beginning of this administration.
There
and
you
have
go.
been
There's a
consulting every
poll.
step
Have you
along the way.
subscribed
But
if
these
you are
countries
new
will have to
today?
step up. They, at a minimum, have to be able to conventionally defend their own sovereign national territory for the most part.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Van Hollen, you're next.
Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. This is your first public hearing since President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu launched an illegal war against
Here we
Iran.
go, guys. Here we go.
Netanyahu said he's been waiting 40 years to do
Let's
this.
watch how he navigates.
Turns out he
the
finally found a
sharks.
president who was both stupid and reckless enough to join him. The war has killed 14 American service members, wounded hundreds more, and killed thousands of civilians. It's driving up the
Unfortunately,
price
but that's
of
the
gas,
nature of war.
food, and much more. Trump obviously doesn't care. He called high gas prices peanuts and said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." That's from the President of the United States. And all for what? The President told us 91 days ago that we had, quote, won the war in Iran. Last year, he told the country, Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
You see, it's all about
that
getting
false?
Trump.
Let's
How
face
can you
it, Mr. Secretary,
believe
the Trump
or
foreign
even
policy
agree
has
with anything a
become
liberal
a
says?
dumpster fire. This is the same president who's more interested in flattering Vladimir Putin than in protecting Ukrainian sovereignty. The president who lifted restrictions on the transfer of sophisticated U.S. chips to China, but came
China?
back from his trip there with nothing but ballroom envy. He tweeted about that the other day. This is the president who brought on Elon Musk to take a chainsaw to AID, which has enabled the current Ebola
And
outbreak
goodbye
in the
to it.
DRC. We've also witnessed corrupt crypto deals with the UAE royal family that have enriched the Trump family at the expense of our national security. We've seen an administration engage in extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, hijack Venezuelan oil, threaten to invade Greenland, and
We have
weaken
sanctions
the
on that
NATO
oil, so no wonder
alliance.
we did.
Here at home, a Reagan-appointed judge said that you and former Secretary Noem abused your powers when you locked up and still seek to deport students for protesting the destruction of Gaza. The Reagan-appointed judge said you did that, quote, primarily on account of their First Amendment-protected political speech. Speaking of Gaza, the so-called Board of Peace seems to have run around. Meanwhile, while Senator Rubio once proclaimed that the U.S.
Judy,
must,
we appreciate
quote,
you.
work to ensure that refugees who flee
Don
war,
Postal,
torture,
1995.
and persecution
Oh, that's the
are
year I got
provided
married.
safe environments to live
So I'm
and
not
thrive
married.
in. Now, as Secretary of State in this administration, you have capped refugees at a record low of 17,500, and white South Africans, Afrikaners, have comprised roughly 99% of those slots, Mr. Secretary. A race-based refugee system. At the same time, the president's preventing Cuban political refugees from entering the United States, even as you've imposed a near oil blockade on that repressive regime. The stated goal is to change the government there, but the only real change is humanitarian crisis inflicted on millions of people, not members of the regime. And in that regard, Mr. Secretary, I have a question for you regarding the designation
When
of
you
Cuba
attack Iran,
as a state sponsor of
you're
terrorism. On
attacking
very
the
first
regime, you
week,
stupid
at least, of
idiots.
this administration, you reinstated, the administration reinstated that.
But the
And in a
Ayatollahs don't
recent
care. Their
January
leadership don't care.
26
They just
EO,
don't care.
you made
Subscribe.
statements suggesting
Charlie, it
connections
means to
to
subscribe.
Hezbollah and Hamas. The
Have you hit that
previous
subscribe
administration
button?
did a thorough review with the intelligence
Welcome
community
in, by the way.
and-
How you
and
doing,
concluded
Charlene?
that there was no evidence
I got a sister
that
named
Cuba was
Darlene.
engaged in ongoing state sponsor of terrorism. Did you find new evidence to support that conclusion?
Well, first of all, let me just say that's your question, but you made this long statement of which I disagree with most of it. We won't have time to address every point that you made. So let's stick to Cuba specific, because that's the question that you asked. Cuba has sponsored terrorism, and it's been supported groups. For example, virtually every left-wing, radical, violent terrorist group in the Western Hemisphere has at some point relied on support from Cuba. The ELN, the FARC dissidents, including them, have been involved there. We also know, for example, that Cuba continues to host a pretty substantial collection, intelligence sites on behalf of the Chinese and the Russians. But you look at the region and you look at all of these leftist, Marxist, terrorist organizations, all of them, in many cases,
Mr.
got their
Secretary,
seed money
if I
from
can
the
move on.
Cubans.
I noticed you did not answer my question, because my question specifically related to whether there was new evidence to support that conclusion. I can just tell you.
Why would I need new evidence?
Because you're claiming that they're a state-sponsored terrorism, suggesting they're ongoingly involved in that. My final
Oh,
question to you,
jaded
Mr. Secretary,
American.
relates to the
Smack.
El
Yes.
Asca Mosque complex. There have been
She says
reports that the
it
United
wasn't
States is working with
race-based
Israel
when the
to take
Dems
away
brought
the
in
Kingdom of Jordan's
Somalians and
custodianship over the
Haitians
El
and
Asca
everything else
Mosque
on the
complex
planet.
in East Jerusalem.
Yeah,
Can
I'm
you
glad you're here,
confirm
Charlene. I'm glad you checked it
today
out.
that there's
Thank
no
you for
I'm
that.
not even aware of those reports.
There are
I do
reports, so I
not
was hoping
support
you could
Order
Is that like a media
66.
report,
Oh, he's
or-
all right.
There have been several
That
media
one's okay. That's a
reports.
Star
Well,
Wars
you know the
reference.
media is always accurate.
No, they're not, and that's why I'm getting.
Yeah, no, I've never even heard
So
that.
if
That's
you
the
think
first
that's-
time I even hear anybody discuss that.
All right, well, I'm glad to hear that, Mr.
But
Wait,
we have a
whoops.
great relationship with Jordan.
Okay,
You know,
good,
we're
he's
very
still here.
helpful. So
Yeah.
I've just never heard that before. You should. I don't know what article you're referring to. Just give it to me. I'll look at it.
I'm happy to.
Is it a credible website?
I do
I'm
not
glad
support
to-
Order
I'm glad to hear
66.
you
The
say, Mr.
Jedi
Secretary,
were
there's
wiped
no
out
truth.
because
I've
of
never
Order
heard that
66.
discussed by
Thank you.
anybody.
Happy Pride Day. Get out of here. No. Not on a
You're
Christian
up
channel.
next. Oops, I'm
And you
sorry.
can't call
Senator
yourself a
Gaines was here
Christian
earlier.
if you're supporting that. There's just no
Senator
way.
Gaines.
It's not
Chairman,
possible.
thank you. Ranking Member
Yeah,
Shaheen,
get
good to
them
see you
out
as
of
well.
here.
One of the underreported successes for your diplomacy and this administration
Get 'em out.
is
I don't
what's
want 'em in here.
happened to the peace agreement, a landmark agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I know
They're obviously not
Secretary,
willing to
you just
repent
were in the
or
region most
change.
recently. A major step forward for a region
I'm not bringing that
long
spirit in
beset
here
by
if they
conflict.
still
Nearly
support
40
it.
years of a hot war. And through your leadership and President Trump's leadership, you've brought true peace to an area of the world sandwiched in
Different
between
if people
Russia
want to change their
and
life
Iran.
for God. It's
It
completely
was creative
different.
thinking
But
that
they
led to
don't
the establishment
when they start saying
of the
garbage
Trump
like
route for
Happy
international
Pride Day.
peace and
Shut up.
prosperity as a solution
You
to
mock
some of the
the
stickier
Lord.
issues in that negotiation. The program
But if you wanna
promises
go to
be
hell,
a
that's up to
boon,
you,
not
but you
only
can
for Armenia
avoid it.
and Azerbaijan, but also
But they say a
many
homosexual
neighboring
spirit
countries.
is
As
one of the
Brzezinski once
hardest
said, talking on the global
demonic
chessboard, his
spirits to
book,
break.
that
It's hard,
Central
very,
Asia
very hard.
is the wine bottle.
Oh, that's good. He's
and
gay. I had a
Azerbaijan's
best
the
friend that was
cork.
gay in high
You
school.
Uncork
Very
the
gay.
wine bottle, suddenly you've got oil
And he
gas
understood
and critical minerals
my
flowing
pain if
back
I ever
towards the
broke up with a
west,
girl when I was
instead of to
hurting.
Russia,
And he was one of the
to
best friends I ever
China,
had.
and to Iran.
In fact, I invited him
Mr.
to my
Secretary,
birthday
can
party
you
in
tell us a
7th
little
grade
bit about how
with
you
the
plan to
basketball team.
implement the TRIP framework agreements
felt bad for him. I
and
did.
deliver
He
major
didn't have many
economic
friends.
benefit to both the United States
And thank you for your subs,
in
yes.
a very historically troubled region?
Yeah, I got no problem
Thanks.
with gay people
Actually,
personally.
as you said, I was there
But keep that garbage out of my
last week. Or
schools.
was it Tuesday, maybe? We signed the TRIP agreement.
Leave the
between
kids
the US
alone.
and
Adults,
and
be as
Armenia,
gay
and
as you
this is-
want.
You described it as a corridor.
That's
which
between you and
I
God.
know it's the anchor of a peace agreement with
You'll have to
Armenia
answer
and
for it,
Azerbaijan, and that's critical. But it's much more than just the anchor of a peace agreement. It really has the opportunity to revolutionize Armenia's
And I'm gonna
strategic
preach the
location
truth
and
in the
become
word.
a
I can
central
care less
hub
what
for
they say.
trade in the region.
I'm trying
it
to help
solves
people.
the issue of access that Azerbaijan cared about, and it was an irritant in their relationship. But
No,
it does much more than
I
that.
disagree,
It has the ability
Charlene.
to transform
No.
the Armenian economy
No,
in
how-
a very powerful way.
let me
Here's
pause
the other
this.
thing that it's done. You know, for a long period of time, our relations with Armenia were quite stagnant.
Okay, now you would call this hatred because the liberals, if you disagree with a liberal, just all you do is disagree. If you just disagree, they consider that hate speech because you simply disagree with their lifestyle. Leviticus and Romans and other parts of the New Testament are against it. Even effeminate is considered a sin and cannot enter heaven. I didn't write the book, but I am the messenger, at least one of millions, maybe even billions. Keep the drag queens out of preschools and kindergartens and K through 12 in general. What you do behind your closed doors is between you and Christ. If you want to destroy yourselves spiritually, fine. I can't stop you. I would rather you didn't. I'm trying to pull you from the fire because one day we all will die. We're dead already. It's a matter of time and how. And if you've lived your life for Christ, if you've been born again, Acts 2:38, the born again experience. I have gay subscribers to my channel, but they understand me. I teach against it, and yet they still stay in here. Oh, there was too, Jill Smith. Don't give me that garbage. That's a lie. Or you've been deceived. I'm not calling you a liar. You may have been tricked. During the Auto Pen administration, they were having drag queens. Don't give me that lie. Shut up.
And in many cases, I would argue almost non-existent.
Leave the
It has
kids
also
alone, you crazy
reinvigorated that
people.
relationship between our two countries
It's demonic.
and allow us to explore opportunities in all sorts of other fields. So we're involved in that very heavily now. We just literally just signed the agreement, and it will allow us to drive and hopefully incentivize U.S. private sector investment in this corridor to the benefit of American companies and American interests, but also to the benefit of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and other regional countries. I would also argue, by the way, and just to point out, and I don't mean this again, I think this is pretty well understood in the open source reporting, the Russians are less than happy about our engagement there. I think there's evidence that they would like the current president to lose his election as a result of this growing relationship with the United States. To be clear, we're not there to infringe on Armenian sovereignty. We're not asking them not to be friends with other countries. We just want to be able to have a relationship with them that's built not just on peace. Peace is important, but that's just the beginning. It's the economic opportunities that it provides. There are American companies and American workers that will benefit from it, but the Armenian people will be the ultimate beneficiaries of this corridor opening.
Just remarkable, and we were there together. In
I
fact,
do
last
believe
August, the White
Adolf
House, when
took
President
Armenia,
Aliyev,
that crazy
Azerbaijan, Prime Minister Pashinyan, Armenia came to sign that
paper-painting
agreement
idiot.
with President Trump's leadership. To think a Shiite Muslim country, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, one of the oldest
I just
Christian
watched
countries
Pat
in the world,
the other day, like,
came
for the-
together
I'm
to
in
sign
Michigan,
a peace agreement.
Charlene.
Was truly
I'm
a
in
breakthrough.
Michigan.
And so it's an underreported story, in my opinion, Mr. Secretary.
Where are you,
And we can
Charlene?
get the story out. This is a critical geopolitical problem that has been definitely remedied by the leadership of this
Yeah, I mean,
administration.
the key center days
And when
is
is
gonna be
ICE going to
execution.
Dearborn,
Like, we can sign an
Michigan? That's
agreement,
what I
you can have
wanna
the things
know.
in place. We now have to make sure
Mr.
we are
President,
focused on driving
send
it and ensuring
ICE
that
to
to the extent
Dearborn.
American companies can contribute to the infrastructure, to the railway, to the highway, to everything that needs
It-
to
it
happen
doesn't
in
make
order
sense
for that
that they haven't
corridor
went
to
there
open.
yet.
And then the spin-off effect of it as well.
That would be the first
we don't
question
wanna-
I'd
we don't
ask
need to
President
dominate
Trump.
it. We're not asking for an American monopoly economic, but we do want our companies to get a fair shake in there. And by the way, partnering with Armenian companies in many cases, so it becomes mutually beneficial.
Secretary, before my time runs out, I want to bring up one very important final point. As you well know, I've been spending a lot of time over the past few years working with our friends in Central Asia, across the Caspian there, with the 5 Central Asian countries. Things are progressing well thanks to your engagement and encouragement and President Trump's. And we're seeing a lot of fruit from last year's
Hey,
C5
we're at
plus 1 summit that was right here in
5,050
Washington.
members.
That being said, there is still
Why
a
do you
major
wanna be
hurdle
called
to
Star?
strengthen our ties. One of the key
Your name is
irritants
Charlene.
to our friends in Azerbaijan and in Central Asia is
But
the
we're
infamous
glad you're here.
Jackson-Vanik trade restrictions.
what do you
These
need
are
help with?
Soviet-era relic restrictions. In fact, Senator Murphy and
I got a
are
lot
the
of moderators
co-leads
here that are
on
good
the
people that
repeal.
would be willing to hear you out.
It's long past due.
I had to
that we
throw
get
those
this,
over there, otherwise she was
changed.
gonna harass me all day.
Mr. Secretary, is removing these restrictions a priority for you and your department? and would removing them have a significant impact on our relations with Central Asia?
Yeah, it's a detriment. We'd like to see it removed, and I think you should talk to the chairman and the ranking
Love you.
member about putting it on the agenda with you guys. They're right there. You
Yep,
can tell
I
them.
got it.
It's finance.
Oh, it's finance. You
finance
don't have
committee.
jurisdiction over that?
It is.
You're very responsible, Jenna. You definitely are
Finance.
growing up.
Well, that's good. That's what I do too. It's
I
not my
have
job.
raised
It's
you
not
well.
yours.
And our encouragement from our friends
the
over in the
time you
House
were
will be helpful. We'll
14
work with you on
months
that,
old.
Mr. Secretary.
You should get it
Thank you.
passed. I mean,
Thank you.
look,
We
it
need
would
to
be
get
very
done.
helpful.
Yeah, it would be. Thank you.
Absolutely.
First of all, let me say that I absolutely concur with the Secretary and Senator Deans with you, and I've talked to the President about this, as you know, and I have actually talked to the Chairman of the Finance Committee, who I know relatively well, and we actually have a plan for going forward. You and
Why
I are gonna meet on
Dearborn?
that here pretty
Because
quickly.
I'm
glad I
pretty
have friends
certain
in
there's
high
a
places, Mr.
ton of
Chairman. Thank
illegals
you.
there.
But no, you're
Dearborn
absolutely right
has
on
the
that.
highest
It's just in the queue.
Muslim count
So,
in the United
with
States.
that,
And I wouldn't be
let us go
surprised if
to
it's
Senator
full
Coons.
of illegals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Mr.
Get 'em
Secretary,
out.
National Security Advisor, good
We'll
to see you
send
again.
missionaries to their countries
I know
to help
from
them.
our service here together that you agree that China is the greatest national security threat that we face. And one of the key reasons is their repeated threats to take control of Taiwan by force if necessary. And Taiwan, as we both know, is not just some faraway island. It produces 90% of the semiconductor chips critical to everything from F-35s to iPhones. And its geography makes it indispensable, both to global commerce and military power. Do you agree with that?
Taiwan? Yeah, it's not just strategically important in terms of where it's located. It also is the message that it sends to the world if something were to happen to it.
Agreed. That's why for decades, really with leadership from the Senate in a bipartisan way, we've provided arms to deter the PRC's potential military aggression. In fact, you introduced the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act of 2023.
You had a
In
doctor
January,
write in your
Congress
medical file that you
pre-approved
voted.
a
Are you
$14 billion
serious?
arms package for Taiwan. It's been 6 months. We haven't received
Wow.
a notification. Have you advised
I don't
President
think
Trump to
that's,
proceed with this?
Yeah, it's under, but I
legally
don't know if you
right.
were here a moment ago when I discussed, we just
not
did
even-
11
it's not even
billion in
ethical based
December,
upon
which was, I think,
standards
the
of
largest
medicine.
sale
Has
in
nothing to do
history.
with your
Certainly,
health
I think it was
unless you
more
have
than the accumulative amount under
TDS,
the Biden administration.
which is a real thing.
And I recall during 6 years of the Obama administration, there was zero gone to Taiwan. So some way you would argue that we're trying to make up
So
ground.
why hold off on it now?
Well, so the other 14 is being reviewed. It's under review. It hasn't been, I think it's been noticed, but it hasn't been reviewed. I mean, it hasn't been approved yet.
So
It's
here's
under
my
review under the
concern.
White House.
Mr.
But
Secretary, my concern is that President Trump has said publicly that arms sales to Taipei are a great negotiating chip with China. And my concern at a time when the PRC has been far more aggressive than they were in previous years, centerline crossing, circumnavigation of Australia, aiding Iran and Russia in their war goals and aims, frankly, literally helping Iranians target U.S. service members. I respect the importance of our having an open negotiation and relationship with the PRC, but in the meetings you were in Beijing, did the president offer to condition arms sales to Taiwan in order to placate Xi Jinping?
well, look, I'm not going to discuss what was the president's words in a meeting or not. Suffice it to say
Jade,
that,
I'm
you know,
sending
that
you a
specific
message
question
to
you just
your,
asked, that's not the
Facebook.
context in which the president has raised this in the past. When the president says it's a great negotiating thing, what he's really saying is it's because China, as you can imagine, always mentions this. Like this is a top priority for them. They are constantly talking about Taiwan arms sales. But that in no way is what is holding up our decision-making or the White House's decision-making. It is something the president will have to decide on the timing of when and how that is executed on. It's been approved by Congress. It's been noticed. The money's available. And as I said, we are just coming off the heels of a very large sale in December of last year. So there are a variety of reasons why these things don't happen immediately.
Well, I'll just assert, Mr. Secretary, that there is more reason than ever for the administration with congressional support to continue providing robust military capacity to Taiwan, given that the PRC is more and more regionally aggressive. You also introduced and passed legislation in 23 prohibiting any president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO. I assume this was because you recognize that our alliances are a key advantage against Russia, against China, against other adversaries. Do you still consider Article 5 an unconditional commitment?
Yeah, so let me address that holistically if it's okay, because I think we have time to do it. First of all, you're right. I have throughout my entire career in the Senate and through much of my time now in this administration been a supporter of NATO. I see its utility. The key, and I'm just being honest with you when we talk about this, one of the key arguments that I would always use on behalf of NATO is the fact that it allows basing rights that we could use in a contingency operation in a time of conflict, in a time of need, that we just have had. So when you have countries in this alliance, because understand, at the end of the day, we are providing basically the defense backbone of an entire continent of rich countries. These are not poor countries, these are rich countries. And the utility of NATO for us is that it provides these basing rights. Now we are living in a world in which some of these countries, I point to Spain as an example, openly brag about how they've denied us the use of these bases. And so if the core rationale for us being in NATO,
they denied us use of what you and your taxes
is the ability
have
to
paid
use
for.
bases. And then we have members of that alliance that are basically denying the use of those bases in a contingency.
Let's be
it calls
clear
them
about
to
that.
question the entire thing.
Forgive me, I have one more question I want to make sure we get to. Is it not true that some of the challenges in our NATO relations have only come after President Trump threatened to seize territory from a trusted and reliable and
No, I don't think
contributing
that's
partner?
fair. Yeah, I don't think that's fair.
I think he publicly said both.
I know, but I don't think-
Use
Here we
tariffs
go.
to
Here we
coerce
go.
Denmark into giving up Greenland.
Yeah, but just to tell you, look, if you go back and study the history of it, NATO tensions and debates within U.S. or whether we should be in NATO, in the 1970s, it was the reverse. It was the administration trying to stay in NATO and Congress trying to get us out.
Yes.
I happened to see a speech, they were playing it after he passed away on C-SPAN, Jesse Jackson at the 1988 Democratic Convention calling for the United States to get out of NATO.
I
So
was
these
there.
debates over NATO, you were at
As
that?
was Joe Biden.
Oh.
And Joe Biden didn't support that position then, and I
know.
don't support that position now.
But
Let
my
me move
point
to
is
a
that
last
these
question.
debates
Joe
about
Biden
NATO have been
couldn't
ongoing for a
support
long
picking
time.
up a pencil off
There's
the floor,
about
let alone handling that thing.
1,100 vetted
Other people were doing it
vetted
for him, that's
Afghan
obvious.
allies being held at Camp As-Salia in Qatar. And that includes 400 children and 150 family members of currently serving active duty U.S. service members. They've been stranded there for a year and a half. And there is talk of sending them either back to Afghanistan into the waiting arms of the Taliban or into war-torn and now Ebola-infected countries like the DRC. And these are people who they or their immediate family members served alongside U.S. soldiers at great risk. Can you commit to working with me and others in this body to support the relocation of these vetted individuals to the United States, especially those who are family members of currently serving U.S. soldiers?
Yeah, I can't, first of all, as you know,
You're
we're
right,
under an
Estrada.
executive
The
order now
liberals'
after the National Guard
hypocrisy
attack here,
is
and
without
so,
question.
that happened last year.
It's-
So we
it's
can't admit any Afghans
mind-boggling.
at this point into the country. That said, you just pointed to them being sent back to Afghanistan. Our goal, we've worked on this, and we'll work with you on it,
Please.
is we have talked to multiple countries. Now, I don't know of any single country that's going to take 1,000 people, but we've talked to multiple countries about taking several hundred of these people and allowing them to move to a safe location. As you know, we are operating under not just those restrictions, but broader restrictions about immigration into the United States after 25 million people entered this country illegally over a 4-year period leading up to this administration.
president just
But I'll work
raised-
with you to find the right places for them to go. We want that to happen.
The president just raised the refugee cap exclusively to allow Afrikaners into our country. I would welcome a chance to work with you to find safe third countries for these Afghans. And I frankly think we ought to be revisiting our refugee policy, because the refugees who've come into our country in the past are the most vetted and often the highest contributing. As you know, my childhood church hosted a South Vietnamese family, and seeing the 5 of them become great Americans, entrepreneurs, contributors. It is refugees from oppression overseas, whether from Cuba or Venezuela, Vietnam or Afghanistan, who have long contributed to the United States. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Paul.
I'd like to revisit for a moment the boats that were blowing up in the Caribbean and the Pacific that referred to as drug boats. I think it's interesting that the 3 secret criteria we're using to blow up the boats doesn't include whether they have drugs on board. I would like to add that the statistics from the Coast Guard also say that when we interdict alleged drug boats in the historic way, the way we've always done it, about 1 in 4 don't have drugs. We make mistakes. We see something suspicious about the boat, we stop them, and they don't have drugs on board. I would also like to add that drugs is not a criteria for blowing up the boats that are called drug boats, but neither is arms. So in order to blow them up, we don't have to say that they're armed or have drugs, and I think a lot of people would have questions, which I still do.
Oh, I think it's time for lunch.
I am glad to hear today, though, that the administration and the negotiations are willing to trade sanctions relief for removal of enriched uranium. I've said for a long time and argued for a long time that sanctions in and of themselves rarely, if ever, are of any value. I've yet to see any Chinese behavior that's changed because of sanctions. I've yet to see any Russian behavior change because of sanctions. I've really yet to see any Iranian behavior change because of sanctions. However, sanctions do have some leverage and ability to exact change if you remove them. So the removal of sanctions actually might
Sanctions are more of a wake-up call for a nation to get their act together and stop being stupid.
Vocal on the airways
Just like
recently
we
saying,
can't
"Oh,
use
no,
those
we
air
can never
bases
negotiate with them.
when
These
there are air
terrible
bases
people." Well, you don't
paid
really
for.
negotiate with really friendly, good people. You're, you know, in a time of war, you're going to have to negotiate with an adversary. So I do commend and supportive of the idea of this. And the other thing is, it's very verifiable. You don't have to wait for verification. You could say the trade sanctions end as soon as we get the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium. Now, it has to be dug, I guess, some of it from under a mountain of rubble, but at the same time, be very verifiable. But what I would argue and what I would advise is that you really, you know, why not offer everything? Offer all of the relief of virtually all of the sanctions if you get it. Now, you can wait if that's what you want, is the enriched uranium out and a promise. Now, the rabid hawks will argue, well, we're not going to negotiate with terrorists. We're not going to negotiate with bad people.
I used to
then they'll
think this
continue
guy
to have
was all
enriched
right.
uranium,
I'm
they'll
just not
continue
much
to
for him
enrich
anymore.
uranium. So I do think that
He's a rhino.
militarily obliterated their military. All of that is true. It's as Fred Ickley wrote in Every War Must End, that military victory doesn't always translate or lead to political resolution or to things that you want done. You know, what we really want done is no more enriched uranium, and you don't enrich uranium, you give up on these hopes. But I would say that as we are looking at trading sanctions, you say there's some you can do on your own, there's some that are congressional. I would be bringing in the leaders in the Congress who can give up on these sanctions and hopefully try to get their voice saying yes, if they will give up. Because if you give up like, a few piddling ones that that won't change things. That
Now,
the
typically
White
I'm
House
okay
has
with
the ability
caps,
to do,
but you've
and
been
you still
using
have all
caps
these
a lot.
congressional
Why
sanctions.
are you
If you're on
trying
the
to
other side of
yell?
that
Is
equation,
that
you
what you're
might
trying to
say,
express?
we're not giving up the one thing we think is leverage, the enriched uranium, for maybe a little bit of sanctions relief. So I would say really go all in on it, because it would be verifiable. You don't have to wait and prove it. You would have to prove in the future whether they're enriching. But I think that is a good step forward. But it's also important for people to have a discussion of what diplomacy is, and that diplomacy doesn't always have a bad name. And frankly, I'm glad to hear that the administration is negotiating, and I wish you luck. And I'd love to hear your response in general.
Well, first of all, the president's made clear the priorities. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. And what do they need to have a nuclear weapon? They need a couple things. They need the ability to enrich. That has been substantially destroyed, but could always be rebuilt over time. And the second is the ability, and highly enriched uranium, that's 60%, that could quickly be enriched to 90% weapons grade. The second point you make is about sanctions. So that's the goal here. And the sanctions, first of all, there's a combination of sanctions. There's sanctions that block direct sort of activities that generate revenue. And that's problematic beyond the nuclear program, because they also use this revenue to fund to sponsor terrorism like Hezbollah and others around the region. And then there's the frozen assets, which are related to sanctions, but these are Iranian assets that have been frozen that they don't have access to. So what I would argue, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself because we're not engaged in this conversation with them yet.
Yeah,
but
they
if you
had
get
to
into
go.
a situation
I think that was
in
a
which
wise
the
choice
reason
to
why
get
there
rid
are
of them.
sanctions are because
They
of the
were
nuclear
just.
program. And so if they comply with
And
what
why
we're
would you
demanding
call
on the
them
nuclear
Star?
side of it, you know, zero enrichment.
Their name's
get rid of
Charlene.
the enriched uranium.
I don't know. I felt like
They're
a
complying with
transgender
these
spirit
things. Then
there.
I think
really
that's the
did.
place where the frozen
Something
assets
wasn't
could be
right.
discussed. The more they give, the more they would get. I think ultimately we will still face other challenges related to Iran separate from the nuclear program, like what they use their money on, which is to
Because they
sponsor
always want to
Hezbollah,
be
to sponsor
called
Hamas,
something different.
to sponsor terrorism around the world. But on the nuclear question, which was the president's been focused on
They always want to be
now,
called something
no
different than
nuclear
what their
weapon
biological
program,
name is, because
the
they're
sanctions that are
denying
directly
their
related to the nuclear
biological
program,
identity.
the more they give, theoretically, the more they should be willing to get. What they're not going to get it is a down payment. They're not going to get it as a signing bonus. And I would also point out that negotiations on nuclear matters are highly
I hear ya.
complex, highly technical. And so it will take some time to work through that, as is sanctions, by the way, highly technical and in many cases multifaceted. There are UN sanctions, there are US sanctions, there are US congressional sanctions. So there's a lot to unravel there.
Is benefit from the idea of
Ouch.
trading sanctions relief for activity.
Thank you,
And if
Jesus.
you don't ever trade them, if you just have them on the book, then I think they're of little value in changing behavior. Thank you.
Senator Booker.
Oh, Booker.
Thank
Oh,
you
this
very
ought to
much.
be great. Terry,
Mr.
he's
Secretary,
such
you
a,
and
oh, I
I
can't
talked a lot
stand
about
him.
Africa, and I raised concerns.
Oh,
about
here
a
we
lot of
go.
the cuts.
Racist.
We're seeing
Racist.
globally an increase
I'm
in
waiting for him to say a
tuberculosis,
racist comment.
an increase in malaria
Wait.
cases. We see a continued ongoing
Hi.
on the continent HIV crisis. And the United States has pulled back from a lot of its investments in those areas. Now with the crisis with Ebola, we see that the challenges that have been brought about as a result of our surveillance, early detection, and the like. So I'm just very concerned about what the administration's strategy is, because we're clearly seeing here that what goes on the continent of Africa directly affects our public health as well.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that assessment. I mean, first of all, it's not about cutting back. The response here is not just how much money you spend, it's what results you're going to get. Now, let's talk about Ebola for a second. Ebola, the outbreak in Ebola was in a war-torn, isolated, rural area in the DRC. That's where that began. Since that time, our response has been very quick, very rapid.
Well, so you're saying you did not cut early detection periods. I'm not talking
I'm
about
saying that whatever you're pointing to as the cut is not the reason why there was an Ebola
I'm not
outbreak.
connecting the two. I'm simply saying.
Well, you are connecting them. You just said that our cuts
Senator
never
Rubio, I'm
led-
not trying to get in an argument with you. I would really like to actually have my questions answered. So very quickly, we cut early detection when it comes to infectious diseases on the continent. Factually, this is not an opinion. We made those cuts. We cut early warning systems on the continent.
It had nothing to do with the Ebola outbreak.
So I don't need to tell you, Secretary Rubio, that we're living in a place where an infectious disease crisis anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. The United States has made major reductions in these areas that have put us more at risk. If you're talking about this clearly Ebola crisis, there's other things and other cuts we've made.
That's right.
And
We're
you
not
see
the
it
world's
factually. Even
ATM.
our own,
That'll
even
preach.
our own State Department personnel that I've talked to are saying we're less prepared for a global outbreak than we were before. And my worry is, specifically in a budget hearing, is this budget makes even deeper cuts into the kind of things that could prevent the next outbreak, or, as we've
The
seen
only thing he's worried about is get
unfortunately
Trump.
with COVID, have us more prepared.
Yeah,
The
I don't
China
agree with that
virus,
assessment. I don't know
yes.
who told you that at the State Department.
So
just
let's
as an
move
example,
on. My time is limited. If
I
we're
know,
not-
but that's an
if we-
important
we can't
question.
even
I don't want to
agree
eat
on-
up your time, but
No,
I need to
you-
answer that because I just don't agree with that.
Mr. Secretary, you can't even agree on the facts. We
Because
made
they're not
those-
that's not accurate. I mean, again,
We
you look
believe
at what
in
we've
truth
entered into.
and not
it's not
facts.
accurate
Joe
that
Biden.
we cut early detection.
Because those have all been repurposed in
His wife,
different arrangements
Jezebel
that we now
Jill,
have with
ruined
these
his
countries.
life.
As an example, when
Well,
we
I would like, for the record, because we're not going to cover it in my short time, if you're telling me we are as prepared or more prepared before the Trump administration came in, I'd like to see the
I
facts.
think when these reforms are finalized, which we're on the verge of doing, we're actually going to be better prepared. We are responding today faster, not just to humanitarian crisis, but to outbreaks than we were before. We are responding in some cases within 72 hours, are able to move funds to task, which you weren't able to do in the old system. And we're also building the capacity of
Mr.
these
Secretary,
nation states through
Mr.
these
Secretary,
compacts.
may I please reclaim my time to shift gears? The Strait of Hormuz, I was listening to their conversations you had with some of my colleagues. We've now seen the Strait closed for months, and you explained that we're going to see an opening of the Strait, and that ultimately the exchange we will get for that is after that fact we will release certain sanctions. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that if they open the straits, we will lift our
It
blockade.
does kind of
The
look
straits
like
and the
he's
blockade
sitting
are
behind
what are
somebody else's
interrelated.
nameplate.
And so for the nuclear program, in exchange for
yeah,
getting
because
rid
that
of the
one's
fissile
there.
material out of country, I imagine, is what
This
you're,
is
the highly
there.
enriched uranium, we would release sanctions. Is that correct?
Well, it's not just that. It's also their enrichment activity. They would have to, they would have to make very severe and significant concessions on what they intend to enrich in the
and
future.
already with
Yeah, there's
the
consequences to
March
sin. There
relaxing
is.
of sanctions,
There's mercy and
allowing
grace.
Iranians
also
to sell
comes
oil to the
consequence.
Chinese. Estimates have been between $10 and $50 billion.
If you go around banging
they got
everything
from
with
that
two
relaxing
legs
of
without
sanctions.
protection, you're just
How much
asking for an
money
STD.
might we see in a deal in our relaxings of sanctions in order
I'll
to
just
get rid of
speak
the highly
plainly.
enriched
I don't
uranium
care.
and stop their
I'll tell you the
enrichment.
truth.
Well, let me
not
just
what
tell you
wanna
on
hear.
that portion, the sanctions that were released on Iran were boats on the water. And so that oil was already out in the marketplace. It was sold at market rates, but the sanctions covered, and to the extent we've been able to enforce them, we have the revenues of those sales. So yeah, the Iranian oil was unsanctioned so that it could be sold, but the revenue would have to flow back to blocked accounts, which our sanctions were able to go after. We've also seized, I believe, 6 vessels in the Indo-Pacific that involved Iranian sanctioned oil on top of it. So that wasn't necessarily a trade. They didn't get $50 billion directly as a result of. They might have gotten some of it. They certainly didn't get the majority of it. They are now losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day in revenue because of the blockade. And the blockade exists because of what they're doing in the Straits.
Right, and I guess the conclusion I have, and my time's expired, is that the Strait of Hormuz was open before this unjustified war. We're now scrambling to try to find a way to get it back opened again. Not only is it causing economic havoc to our country and to residents all around this nation, families trying to make ends meet, but you see on top of that, the Iranians finding ways to leverage that, as we allowed them to do with the Chinese for tens of billions of dollars. And so my point is, before we even get to a nuclear negotiation, this regime is getting money to rebuild, purchase more drones, cause more havoc. And this is before we're even trying to get back to
But I apologize, I don't understand how they're getting this. What revenue are you referring to?
Well, there's 2 sources of revenue we're seeing. One is the revenue from the Chinese, that's factually documented. And number 2, the revenue that you're proposing that they should receive by releasing all of their highly enriched uranium, as well as in making a commitment about their enrichment capacities.
Okay, yeah.
Hold on. And that was the exact deal that you guys vilified, that the president and you vilified President Obama from having.
Yeah, no,
So
I don't
here
think
we
those are
have a
not the
worse situation where
Those are not the same
our
deals.
adversary and our enemy, who's causing havoc in the region, who is funding proxies and terrorists, has discovered, thanks to you all, the power of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
No, they didn't
which
discover.
is
They
all-
knew that a long time ago, and they've done it before.
Clearly, we all knew that a long time ago. That's why this
And they intended to do this at
ill-conceived
some point
war
in the
should have
future
never
as well.
happened.
Yeah, but
You have made our adversary in a stronger negotiating position. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, and we're in a stalemate with Iran. And now we're begging to get back into a deal that you all
We're not
trashed in
begging.
the first place.
There's no one begging. I don't know.
Clearly, this is a
Senator
shame.
Booker, your time's up.
But can
Senator
I just-
Rubio, since he's
I do
gone
want to
over, you
address
can
some of these points
respond.
because they go to the heart of the matter. No one's begging for anything here. The Iranians might be begging because their economy's losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day. That they are losing. Understand, Iran had street protests going on before all of this started. All of those factors, economic factors in Iran, are far worse today than they were 6 months ago when those protests were happening. They have hyperinflation, their currency's completely devalued, they're struggling to make payroll for their government workers. Iran is in a very serious situation, and if it was up to the political class there, and I understand everybody there is sort of radical in some way, but if it was up to the people that actually like go to elections and wear the suits and you see on TV, they'd probably make a deal tomorrow. It's the issue they're facing is that the supreme leader and the IRGC Corps are a little bit more immune from those pressures until they can be convinced otherwise. And I think that's the direction that they're moving in, because the reality, I don't know where you're getting this perception that Iran is stronger. Iran has no navy left. They've lost a substantial percentage of their defense industrial base. That Iran has lost a substantial percentage of their missile launchers. And their economy is far worse today, and I mean far worse today, than it was 6 to 9 months ago. And they are looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of reconstruction costs just to get to where they were 6 months
Mr. Rubio, you keep telling us how we're winning this war. The president keeps saying,
Well, the war's over
completely
now.
annihilated. The war is not over. And yet the American people see how we're losing at the pump and with their costs, and yet this thing still hasn't been resolved. Every day he tweets out, oh, we've obliterated them, we've annihilated them, they're going to surrender. But yet we still find ourselves spending billions of dollars a week
Senator
on
Booker,
a war abroad.
you've gone way over.
They
it.
lie
It would be
like
nice
a
if we
rug.
had hearings where people
Thank
had
you,
know it,
Senator
too.
Booker. Senator Scott.
All right. Secretary Rubio, so first off, do you think it's important to Americans that the
Yep, that's
Iranian
exactly right,
regime doesn't have
Patty.
nuclear weapons
They
and
hate
ability to
America. They
destroy-
hate us.
I think it's important to the
Their
world.
own people.
The whole world. I mean, this question about the Straits is a great example. Imagine, the Straits gives them leverage. Imagine what nuclear
Big
weapons would
time.
give them leverage to do. At that point, they wouldn't even have to announce that
The
we're controlling
days
this. They
of
would
the,
just say, we
Kennedy
control the
Democrats
Straits.
are
There's
gone.
nothing you can do about it because our nuclear weapon will allow us to do it. You will have to pay us a toll for using an international waterway from now on, and you can't do anything to us militarily because we'll blow you up with a nuclear weapon. That is the leverage that they were trying to build. If they ever got a nuclear weapon, not only would they have a nuclear weapon,
didn't
not only would
catch
they
it.
control the straits, they would be able to act with impunity.
I did
because you
not
wouldn't be able
see
to
it.
touch them. You wouldn't be able to do anything about them.
I want to thank you for what you're doing. Let's talk about Latin America, which is, as you know, important to a lot of people in our state. So
I
thanks
saw
for
the
what you've
person
done with both Venezuela and
I
Cuba.
mentioned him once, but I didn't see the comment.
Let's,
that got
let's do
him voted.
Venezuela first. I think every Venezuelan I know is appreciative of what happened with Maduro. And I know you have a three-step process to get to democracy there. Can you talk about where you are? I mean, I know you've busted your butt to try to get Delcy Rodriguez to do the right thing. We still, unfortunately, have political prisoners not released. We still have oppression. So can you just talk about the process you're going through?
Well, first of all, I remind everybody, what's today, the 2nd? So it's literally been 5 months.
Right.
Like, I know it seems like it was 10 years ago, but it's been 5 months. And I think Venezuela is in a better place today and in a better trajectory today than it was 5 months ago. Now, is it where it needs to be? Is it where it needs to ultimately wind up? The answer is, of course, no. Ultimately, in order to truly transition, they have to have multi-party, free and fair elections. But the conditions for free and fair elections are the following. First of all, you have to have a free and open media. And while you've seen independent journalists are now, for the first time, activated again, that has to exist. Political parties have to be given the space and time to organize. The National Electoral Council has to be reformed so that it has members in it that will actually accurately count the vote. You have to have certain conditions in place. I'm not telling you that's 5 years from now, but it's been 5 months, so I want to be relative to that. Here's what I can tell you. For the first time, certainly, since whenever, in the pre-Chavez era, maybe ever, and certainly since the post-Chavez era, the oil wealth of the country is not being stolen. The oil wealth of the country is going directly to pay government workers, buy medical equipment, audited by KPMG. That's a significant advance. That's not a permanent situation, but that's a very valuable one today. You have seen reforms. You have seen, for example, the infamous prison, El Acoide. It's been closed. You still have about 400 and something, what we determined to believe to be political prisoners, but you've had many others that have been released, including many high-profile ones.
Oh, I
You've
had
seen a
somebody
reform, a
yesterday
systemic reform in
or the day
individuals
before
involved in their
that
government.
said, I'm going to report
replaced
the
by new
channel.
people.
Well,
Some
go
we don't
ahead,
know
you
well,
hack.
others we know a little bit about,
I don't
but
care.
certainly better than the people whose place they took before.
Nothing in
You've
here's
seen a
been
level
said
of
that's not
cooperation
true.
on a couple of topics that I actually can't even discuss in a setting like this, but be more than happy to,
At least with me.
to talk to you about in any
my
of you about in
moderators
the
are the best
appropriate
out
setting.
there, so
I think that's been a positive.
trust them.
By the way, you've seen the retrieval. The United States, with the full cooperation of the Venezuelans, went in and retrieved highly enriched uranium. They had highly enriched uranium in their country because of an old reactor program, not because of nuclear weapons or anything, and they wanted it out of their country. And we were able to go in and actually retrieve it along with the UK mission that went in with us and get it. We have a functioning embassy. And we have direct flights for the first time. Venezuelans are now able to go back, not just visit relatives, but
the
begin to
Islamic
engage in the
government
economic
of
life of the
Great Britain
country.
allowed us
All of that
to,
is to say,
work
it's been
them
5
to get
months.
that?
There is a lot more to go.
'Cause
This is
Islam's
not
pretty much
the
taken
direction we
Europe.
want Venezuela to be. But what I will
Including,
say is that
UK.
the Venezuela that's there now, under the interim authorities, does not pose the threat to the United States that it posed 5 months ago.
That's right. We love
when
our
it was
president.
an open base of operation for Iranian operatives,
You know what
for
it is,
Cuban
Patty?
intelligence, and for others
They
who used it
support
as a base of operation against the
DEI,
national interests.
wokeism,
But we have a lot of
pro-illegal
work to do. We are
immigration,
nowhere near where we want to
pro-abortion,
get to there.
and the
can you give the
LGBTQ.
same
If you
thing
don't
about Cuba?
agree with one of those
Cuba's a
five
very
criteria,
different, I mean, I think
Then
the
they don't
misnomer
consider
about
you an
Cuba,
American
or the
citizen.
misunderstanding about Cuba, Cuba's actually not controlled by the
that
government.
much is obvious.
Cuba's controlled by a military holding company named GAESA. And GAESA virtually owns anything, they own the tourist sector, they own mining, they own the gas stations, they own everything. They generate about 70% of Cuba's GDP is under the control of this military company. And they're sitting on between $14 and $17 billion in assets. So you have people literally starving, people literally like power grid that hasn't been maintained in 10 years, and yet you have this holding military company sitting on these assets. And by the way, not a penny of the money in the military holding company translates over to the public treasury. So the fundamental challenge we have here is that Cuba needs to be, in order for it not to continue to be a failed state, which poses a threat to the United States, they need systemic and serious reform. They need to have economic reforms, and the question is, can they possibly reform, given the people who are currently in charge, both of GAESA and of their government? And I think the answer is they can. I really don't believe this system is capable of reform. unless new people take over or a new mindset takes hold. Now, we've engaged in conversations with them. We've offered them what I think needs to happen in order for their economy to recover. And that's the last point I would make, is I think somebody raised this issue of a oil blockade. Cuba was having blackouts well before January 3rd of this year. They were having blackouts for years. And they were having blackouts for two reasons. Number one, no one will give you free oil except Maduro. That's what's changed here. What's changed here is they're no longer getting free oil from Venezuela. And number two, the main reason why they have energy blackouts is because they didn't invest a single dollar back into their plants, back into improving their plants. And they could have bought this equipment from any company in the world, but they didn't invest in it. Instead, they invested it to build tourist hotels that now sit empty because there's no tourism into Cuba. So Cuba's a little bit more complicated than Venezuela, but it's a mess.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, I trust you're familiar with then CENTCOM Commander and future Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis's famous quote about the importance of funding our foreign policy apparatus. In 2013, in response to a question from the now chairman of SASC, General Mattis pointed out that if you don't find, and I quote him, if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition ultimately, end quote. Unfortunately, despite his service in the first Trump administration, the second time around, you seem to have taken the message as a blueprint rather than as a warning. The budget that you're presenting today cuts the State Department by about a third, after you previously tried to enact steep cuts and eliminations last year, many of which were already rebuked by Congress on a bipartisan basis. Time and again, this administration uses our military as a first tool of choice, manufacturing new crises and new conflicts that worsen the situation for folks abroad as well as for American people back here at home. And now you're here to justify a budget request that further undermines our diplomatic apparatus, the tools and professionals that are critical for not only preventing crises before they begin, but those who will be responsible for negotiating our way out of Trump's war of choice in Iran and whatever other nightmares he dreams up with. So based on how this administration has conducted itself over the last year, our adversaries are learning that the United States is not a reliable negotiator. They're learning that we will quickly turn to using force before working to alleviate crisis points and prevent war.
It's good to have you.
I'm very concerned that in turn increases the risk of our adversaries jumping to use force first, increasing risk to American citizens and American interests around the world. We saw that instinct for the military option in the Caribbean and in Venezuela. And now we're seeing threats of it in Cuba while we're still engaged in the Middle East, where President Trump is blowing a shocking amount of money and failing to uphold his solemn duty to put our service members at risk only for the most serious and imminent national security threats to American people. Mr. Secretary, you also wear the hat of a national security advisor. So with both that hat and as Secretary of State, do you agree that this administration has spent more on Trump's war in Iran than you are requesting today for this entire State Department budget request?
Yeah, I can't speak to the Department of War would have to speak to you about the money and what they calculate are the costs. I can't give you an accurate answer on that because that's not the thing that I look at.
I would think you would
really
have
don't even understand how a person can call themselves Christian if they support the liberals.
Some insight because you are on national security.
Well, I've seen the testimony that Secretary Hegseth and others have conducted in front of their oversight committees, but I just can't. I don't want to give you an answer that's not accurate.
Christianity.
Well, this week, let me put out some numbers that I have. This week, the cost of President Trump's illegal war of choice against Iran are likely to balloon past $35 billion by the rate from DOD's own May calculations and surpass your FY 2027 budget request of $35.1 billion for the State Department and related programs. That's an astonishing figure. Worth repeating, in just 14 weeks, President Trump will have blown through as much, if not more money in Iran than he thinks Congress should spend on U.S. diplomacy for the entirety of the next fiscal year. This administration's distorted priorities have unfortunately revealed some stark lessons for our allies and partners as well. The United States' use of force first will make them less secure as they'll be caught in the crossfire, left scrambling to protect themselves and their people. Mr. Secretary, do you agree that under Operation Epic Fury, our allies and partners in the region have expressed concern about their security and the threats that followed from this administration's uncoordinated actions?
No, I think our allies in the region have been very cooperative, some obviously very aggressively cooperative, like the UAE as an example. Kuwait's been fantastic. Obviously, no country likes to have their oil and their energy infrastructure hit, but I think it's a reminder to them of the threat that Iran poses. And the one lesson when this is all said and done is it's reminded them of You know, despite all the friendly talk that you've seen in the past, how dangerous Iran is to their own interests, how the billions of dollars Iran has spent, despite sanctions, Iran found the money to build drones and rockets. Okay. And luckily, we've taken a lot of them out, but they still have some, and they still have the ability to launch
My question is about our allies in the region expressing concerns, because, you see, public reporting in early May revealed that Saudi Arabia denied U.S. basing an overflight related to Trump's ill-conceived plan to escort ships through the Straits of Hormuz, and they're still not supportive of this risky tanker escort plan, and the Strait is still worse off today than it was before Trump initiated this war. And that doesn't even touch on the wider global lessons being learned by our allies and partners.
Yeah, we don't face
any from the Shangri-La dialogue, where I heard from folks across the Indo-Pacific and especially in Southeast Asia, who are being hit hard by the same rising energy costs that are devastating American communities. And frankly, this administration insists on using military force as a first resort instead of a last resort, no matter the deadly cost of self-defeating impacts. Your budget request here would sadly perpetuate that trend and undermine the roles and responsibilities that you should be fulfilling as Secretary of State. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, I didn't get to answer any of that.
I didn't ask you the question.
Well, she didn't answer the question. She doesn't want me to answer? Can I answer anyway?
You may.
Okay. Well, but she made a bunch of points. I get to answer them, right? First of all, I don't understand this thing about let me tell you, we were just here, maybe you weren't here, we were just talking about it. We did a peace deal with Azerbaijan and Armenia. We just signed the trip agreement yesterday, actually, or last week we signed it. Last night I officialized it. That was diplomacy.
That's great, but the Trump administration has still blown through more money in 14 weeks
do I get to talk to
this entire budget that you're requesting.
Senator Duckworth, I'm going to let Senator Rubio reply to the statements that you made at his request.
Is she related to Kevin Duckworth?
We've got a hard stop at 12.
Okay, but I know, but she said a lot of stuff. I get to answer some of it. All right, so the first is the second is India-Pakistan. We ended that war. We were involved in helping broker that. Thailand, Cambodia, that's diplomacy. We've been very engaged in fact, as I sit here now speaking to you, I've got the Lebanese government and the Israeli government meeting at the State Department starting at 8:30 this morning for the 4th time after engaging last week at the military level.
Marco is a busy Rubio.
We're carrying out diplomacy all over the world constantly and very successfully in many cases. Now, let me make one more point that you raised about the budget request. Guys, we understand how this process works, okay? You guys understand. I know because I've been involved all the time. We OMB, produces sort of timelines for every agency. We put forward a budget. We say, this is the money we've been allocated. This is how we would spend it. There is a congressional process, which I'm sure you're aware of. And in my time here, 16 years that I was here, I don't ever recall us once ever taking the president's budget and passing it into law. I'm not walking away from the budget. We can make it work if that's the budget you give us. But I have a sense, I have a suspicion, right, Senator Schatz, that we're going to have to work with you guys, that we're going to have to, well, you know, that we're going to have to work with you guys on a budget request that meets your priorities and ours. That's how it works. You guys are the appropriators. We have to work within we will tell you what we care about. We will tell you how we're going to spend the money. But ultimately, you will provide us a spending bill, and we will work through those parameters. But we have given you what we can live with. We can make it work. But if you want to, you know, if you're obviously going to have changes here in the Congress. But this stuff about diplomacy and the money spent on the war, diplomacy's always cost less money. We don't buy missiles. We don't buy rockets. We don't buy large airplanes and aircraft carriers. But we've been very effective. And I can give you list after list of places where we have had an impact in either de-escalating crisis before it started or ending active wars. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done in that regard, some of which haven't even been publicly discussed in some cases because they weren't high profile. And my last point. We remain heavily engaged in areas that may be not at the core of our national interests, but nonetheless are related to our national interests. You think about Sudan for a moment and the Quad. This has been a very frustrating situation to put together, but we helped convene a donor conference that got pledges for when that is resolved.
I was thinking the same thing,
We put a lot
Jay.
of time and energy in
a
a situation that now,
My
unfortunately,
God.
has turned into a proxy in the Middle East because of the UAE and the Saudis on opposite
No
sides
offense,
of it.
ladies, but
in
she
Libya,
sounded like a
where our work
gossiping
in Libya
woman.
now it's still divided, but they, for the first time ever, have a joint budget. For the first time ever, are cooperating on energy deals that are going to be beneficial to the people of Libya. So I just don't think it's fair to say we're not actively involved in diplomacy on last year's budget and spending, because we are, and we have been, and to great success.
Thank you. Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clock setter, thank you for resetting the clock. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. And I'm always truly impressed with your ability to navigate around the globe so articulately and explain the positions. Like you previously, I chair the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. One of the focuses that I've had is on Taiwan and Taiwan's relationship in the Western Hemisphere. We actually had our first subcommittee hearing on Taiwan's allies in the Western Hemisphere. And as you well know, Honduras switched diplomatic recognition away from Taiwan in 2023 in exchange for a lot of promises from China. No surprise, those promises have not been fulfilled. And the current president, during his campaign, talked about returning back to Taiwan and restoring that relationship with Taiwan. In your budget, you have $245 million for the Countering PRC Influence Fund. And I'd like to note Senator Van Hollen and I have a bill that would actually carve off a portion of that specifically for Taiwan and countering the PRC influence there. So I guess my question is, what can the U.S. do potentially with that fund, Countering PRC Influence Fund, for Taiwan, particularly as it relates to Honduras, kickstarting that relationship, developing joint set of economic priorities for Taiwan in the Western Hemisphere, anything else we can use that fund for?
Yeah, well, first of all, the reason why these countries switched recognition primarily was because, you know, the Chinese would go in and they would say, if you switch recognition, we are going to provide you this loan, this, and in some cases worse than loans. There was even cases of bribery and things of this nature, but we're going to provide you, you know, a free this and a free that. We're going to build an auditorium for you. We're going to build a bridge. We're going to build a port. And they haven't kept many of those promises. So I think the first thing is to just point to the fact that,
switch.
Yeah, in many cases, these things are not provided. The other angle of it is if it's loans, they create these debt traps, which is an argument we make all over the world, but particularly in the hemisphere. But the broader goal of this fund is not just simply Taiwan related, although that's the reason why that's an action they took as a result of this leverage that was established on them.
Proud of you
but
for
more
that.
broader,
Making
in
a
many
step
cases,
toward the Lord
these countries are trying to develop their telecommunications system.
And
They're
that's
trying
when
to
you
build
begin to
roads.
learn
They're
more
trying to
about
develop
him.
whatever it may be. And frankly, the only companies that show up
I admire you for
are the
your
Chinese companies. And they
wanting
show
to
up
serve
with
the Lord,
lower cost, a financing
especially in these last
mechanism,
days.
et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's a track record of not completing these projects. There's a track
And we
record of
welcome you into
flooding
the
the
channel.
country with Chinese workers that come and do the work.
Open arms.
So
Please
I think part
subscribe
of
if
this
you
fund
haven't.
is designed to create
That's
alternatives
only
to that,
part
to
of it,
give
though.
these
This is a
countries
Christian ministry channel,
alternatives
not so much
to the
political. I have
Chinese
my new
or
political
other
channel
foreign
starting soon
malign influence that might
this
be
weekend.
occurring in their country. Part of that is attracting U.S. commercial ventures to do it, but part of it is providing the resources so these countries can go out and do this without being subject to or vulnerable to this sort of leverage tactic that's used against them.
Thank you. Let me switch to China for just a minute. Your budget notes the merging of the Foreign Service Institute, where a lot of the state language training takes place, with the Human Resource Bureau, and I'm hoping that can improve the language capacity. But here in the Senate, I've picked up the Uyghur Policy Act, which you led when you were here. Part of the bill that I'm especially supportive of is the provision that's supporting the Uyghur language training for Forest Service officers is not only important but required, and that we have Foreign Service officers in Asia and China that can speak that language. I think it's absolutely vital that our diplomats be able to understand the people in their own language as to the abuses that are going on there. Given your previous experience on this bill and the department's focus
Exactly,
on
Redhead.
the
If you're looking to get your
CCP
sins
repression,
remitted,
do you still support
all I
this
need is your
provision,
zip
and
code
can you
and
just
I'll find
speak
you
to
a
how
church.
important this is?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the
they'll reach out to
Uyghur
you.
language is not a widespread language around the world,
And
but it's incredibly valuable.
If you want to be
in an
baptized
important
in
part of the
Jesus'
world.
name,
And so I think we want to see a language proficiency. That's
Did they
generally
dunk
been
you
a
or did they
challenge writ
sprinkle you?
large
And what did
over
they
a period
say
of time.
when
And
they
one of the goals of the
baptized you?
consolidation is to be able
That's
to
my
drive language school more effectively, more quickly to Foreign Service
fact, we
officers
just
before they're
got-
deployed.
Yes.
Obviously, proficiency in certain languages are very difficult. They take longer periods. Some languages are harder to learn than others, especially if the base of the language is, you know, like, just to give an example, it's easy to learn Italian if you speak Spanish. It's much harder to learn Mandarin, you know, and or the Uyghur language for that matter. So, but language is a priority for us. And it's one that, by the way, in our recruitment tools, is one of the things we also look for is whether potential candidates already bring an existing second or third language, which is a huge benefit.
Yes, and just very quickly, do you want to clarify, use this opportunity, the president had a tweet about speaking with Hezbollah yesterday. Do you want to clarify for people what happened and anything that you'd like?
Well, we received communications via the Lebanese government and the speaker over there on behalf of Hezbollah as early as Sunday about that they would restrain from attacking Israeli territory if Israel did not take new strikes in Beirut. And so it came from Hezbollah, but through
allow
Lebanese
us
authorities.
to teach you. Well,
I think that clarification is important. Thank you for
we
being
want
here
you
today.
to
I
be
yield.
part of us.
Thank you. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen. Thank you, Secretary Rubio,
I'll have
for being
Pastor
here.
Benjamin Kreitz as my guest Friday
Secretary
night.
Rubio, I
if
applaud
everything
the
goes according to
administration for
plan with him.
facilitating a ceasefire last year between Israel and Gaza that will keep Israel
I'll
safe
get her
and
outta
from
here. There's
further
no room
Hamas
for her.
attacks and the suffering of
The cat,
Palestinian
not you,
civilians.
the cat. I got
But
two
I have
cats
serious
that love it up
questions
here, and I got a bunch of
about
cards up here on the
transparency,
sorting.
about the funding for the so-called Board of Peace in light of recent reporting that suggests donor funds have been deposited into a private J.P. Morgan account with no independent transparency mechanisms in place. As a member of the Board of Peace, Executive Board, and Secretary of State, you should be in a position to provide us with some answers. And you, as a former senator, know our role here, trying to get answers. And my team's been asking for a contact with the Board of Peace for several months just to do our due diligence, but we've received no response. Can you tell me exactly who my team should be reaching out to, please?
Well, I can now because the Board of Peace has finally hired some staff. It's going to be a very lean operation. They're working out of the Institute of Peace Building. So for some period of time, they really were not. It was just a very lean operation.
Do you have a name for my?
I do. I just don't have it on me, but I will get that
That's
to
fine.
you.
We will-
But
we-
I think they just hired staff like in the last two weeks.
We will follow up with you. Thank you. I have a few other questions. Can you tell me how much money is in the World Bank administered Board of Peace Fund? Do you have a?
We don't have the answer because there's not U.S. dollars that have flowed. These are donor funds.
So can you tell me how much money is in the J.P. Morgan account?
Yeah, but again, those are not
Who has
U.S.
the-
government accounts. Those are
Who has oversight?
Well, that's the key here. That ultimately the oversight over the funds of the Board of Peace will be done, and especially when it comes to U.S. dollars, will be done by you in Congress. We have not committed those funds there yet, although we've made a pledge until they've stood up the Board of Peace administratively.
Congress will have oversight ability. Thank
Well,
you.
on the U.S. dollars.
Of the U.S. dollars. Can the money in the J.P. Morgan account be used to compensate the president or his family or anyone directly?
No one's talking
connected
about
with the
doing that.
president? And you said you just hired some folks and it's going to be lean. About how many full-time personnel do you expect?
I think they ultimately want to get up to 15 or 20 full-time. I think they've started at 5,
And
if
so
I'm
is-
not mistaken.
is
I
the-
could be wrong, but those are the numbers I recall.
So is the $50 million in U.S. taxpayer money that your department wants to give to the Board of Peace, is that going to be used to cover this?
But I think that 50 million was reversed. We ended up not doing that as a result of the way it was constructed. The Board of Peace is now built out as an international, non-governmental organization.
We will follow up with you on that once you give us a contact after this. Thank you. So Secretary Rubio, during your confirmation and budget hearings last year, you committed to me you would support women and girls programming at the State Department. But under your leadership, you've terminated dozens of awards supporting women and girls. You shuttered the Office of Global Women's Issues, GWE. You fired the entire staff. You said repeatedly that regional bureaus will now be responsible for programs to support women and girls, but my staff has asked every single regional bureau if they have a plan to do this, and not a single bureau can provide me with an answer. And so, Secretary Rubio, I'm just so disappointed. I want to believe that, you didn't lie to us, lie to me, and so I want to give you an opportunity to explain how women's issues have been integrated into
well,
the
I don't know.
bureaus. Do we have an outline?
I don't know
of the
who's
plan?
telling you that at the regional bureaus, because that's not accurate. Now some regional bureaus have a larger mandate on women's issues than
So
others.
is
As
there
you
a-
example, like in Europe, it's probably less intense
Can you tell
than
me
in Africa.
who on your team we can reach out to then to find out? Because we're not getting, they're telling us they don't know.
Well, the regional bureaus tell you they don't know?
That's
Not only
correct.
does every regional bureau have someone in charge of women's issues, or at least in charge of that portfolio, but most of our embassies, especially in some of these key
So can-
places,
Can
are
we follow
advocating
up,
this.
and can I call you
Yeah,
and
of
have a
course.
conversation? Because somehow there's a
Yeah,
communication.
because we didn't eliminate the program. We simply felt that there's a difference between the women's issues, for example, that you would face in Africa versus what you may be facing in some part of
Could you name a
Asia.
single new program that you've stood up in the last, since the GWE office was closed? Do you know of any?
First of all, almost every single one of our programs that we do now, our humanitarian response to crisis, our food programs that we distributed, all of them have a women's component to it.
So-
Primarily because in these societies,
Can we
women are the
follow up
first
with
ones
your team,
affected.
please, so we can get some clarification? 'cause
Yeah,
we
we'll
haven't been
follow
able
up, and
to
I'll
do
give
that.
you the right people.
Oh,
on it.
those
But each
stinking
of these
crows are
bureaus has
back.
someone,
Oh,
or
they're
more
killing
than
my
one
bird
case.
feeder.
The
more than
last
one
one
I'm
here
gonna
is,
get a bird
there
feeder
is
camera.
a International Women of
fact,
Courage
I already-
program.
I
You
have
and
an
the First
extra
Lady have
camera.
championed. Are you going to commit to maintaining that?
The which one, I'm sorry?
The Women of Courage program. You and the First Lady have championed that.
Yeah, well, we had an award ceremony last year.
So-
I don't know if one is scheduled for this year yet.
Thank you. With the remainder of my time, I'd like to remind the American people that as the Secretary of State, your main duty as America's chief diplomat is to maintain our relations with foreign nations. This is why I was shocked to see that you were at a party with President Trump in Miami instead of accompanying Vice President Vance to Pakistan for negotiations.
What party was I at?
What does that matter? Where's the relevance?
I was at a
It's
party?
publicly reported, and there's photos there.
But
In
what
fact,
party?
Steve
No,
Witkoff-
but you're going to say that. I'm going to
no.
answer
You
it.
better
I'm gonna
talk.
answer that
Let me
question, 'cause
finish
that's an
my
absurd
statement.
statement. I was not at a
As
party.
I finish my paragraph,
All right.
he can answer.
People are going to
In fact,
slander me. I'm going to answer
Steve
it.
Witkoff and Jared Kushner, both of whom were never confirmed by this body to be America's diplomats, accompanied the vice president in the negotiations. Even Iran's foreign minister was not there, yet you were not, was there, excuse me, and you were not. I just feel that's embarrassing for us, and it's embarrassing for you. So, Mr. Secretary, Congress represents the American people. We have the power to confirm who represents America abroad. We confirmed you to be our Secretary of State. We confirmed you to be in the negotiations that are happening. And it's just unthinkable to me that you are missing high-stakes negotiations or that you're not involved. It's sad to see
Senator
you
Rosen,
excluded. Thank
your
you.
time's up.
Yield back.
Okay,
But
so let me just-
Senator, Secretary Rubio should
You're
have the
100%
opportunity to
inaccurate
reply.
and 100% wrong. Here's why. Number one, the Vice President of the United States was there, and he wasn't confirmed by us, and he was elected by the American people.
That's
Okay?
right.
He is the second in line to the presidency of the United States. He was president. Mr. Witkoff is the president's envoy for negotiation for peace deals. Mr. Kushner is a private citizen that serves as an advisor on these functions. They were the team that we sent to Pakistan. I was not at a party. Where I was is next to the president. Because in the midst of those negotiations, I was in communications with them. And in fact, I think there is media reporting from that evening on how on multiple occasions I went into a back room, I came back out and spoke to the president and was constantly updating him. On that evening,
By the way,
I
there's no
spoke
such
to
thing as
Mr.
Northeastern
Kushner and our
Pentecostal. I'm just
negotiating
joking.
team and Mr. Witkoff
I am
on at least
Pentecostal,
6
though.
occasions, including twice on
That
a
much is
secure line
obvious.
from the phone they had access to over there. So
confirm
you don't know what you're
you.
talking
Thank
about.
you.
You're just
Senator
making
Rosen,
stuff up.
he has the floor.
I know your
Please.
staff wrote up this cute statement for your TikTok video, but it's not true, and it's not real. That's not what happened. Okay? I'm the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. I was co-located with the President in the midst of a high-stakes negotiation so that I could immediately inform him about events occurring halfway around the world. I was where I needed to be at that moment because we had a very capable team on the ground in Pakistan, led by the Vice President of the United States.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn.
Secretary Rubio, I've heard some of my colleagues here on this committee suggest that the U.S. started a war with the Iranian regime 92 days ago. I happen to believe that the Iranian regime started a war against the West and Israel and has been at war with us since 1979. What's your view?
Amen. That'll preach.
Well, if you go back to 1979 and the taking hostages and build it out from there, I don't know the numbers, if we could even add them up. It's incalculable. Thousands of people around the world, including many Americans, have been killed because of direct Iranian action. All the IEDs, those roadside bombs that maimed and killed our soldiers, were all the mastermind work of the IRGC for decades. The IRGC sponsors terrorist attacks all over the planet. In fact, they were involved, for example, in the bombing of a Jewish center in Argentina in 1993 or 1994. They're consistently, we have people convicted in the United States of America, and one was arrested yesterday, Iranian agents plotting the assassination of American
I heard
political
about
leaders,
that.
including
Yeah,
the President of the United
definitely.
States. They've been waging nonstop, not to mention their massive sponsorship of Hamas, of Hezbollah, and all the activities
Well,
those
coconuts
groups have
are real. Good to
undertaken.
see you, buddy.
So you're absolutely right that the Iranian system has been waging war on the West.
let me
But
stop
why
and
is
just say
anybody
something.
in the United States?
I can because I can, and I can because I care. Undenominational. If you want to say non-denominational, right, or same thing. That means, technically it means, you are not a licensing carrier. You don't hold a license with a Baptist. You don't hold license to preach and teach. You don't hold, and you don't have to have a license. But usually those that are aligned with being Baptist and they're preaching and or teaching, they'll get a license from an organization within the Baptist or the Southern Baptist or the Pentecostal movement. But to say you're non-denominational, that's what that means. Because there's no such thing as non-denominational when it comes to the reading of the Word of God. It doesn't work like that. You hold a doctrine, a teaching. Doctrine means teaching. a certain type of teaching. The Baptists believe different than the Catholics. The Catholics believe somewhat different than the Presbyterians and the Methodists. That's doctrine. That's Bible teaching. So when you say you're non-denominational, that simply means you're not part of a denomination or an organization within the denomination. You catch what I'm saying? For example, in the Apostolic Pentecostal movement, in which I am happy to be part of, I could get licensed with the UPCI. I could get licensed with ALJC, PWA. Those are organizations within the denomination. But to say you're non-denominational, that is the only way that could be accurate. Because if you believe simply in confessing and believing the Lord Jesus and you're saved, that's a doctrine. If you believe the fullness of the truth, which is confession and believing, but repentance, Jesus' name baptism, so your sins get remitted, by God, you can't enter heaven with unremitted sin, folks. You have to be baptized in Jesus' name, not Father, Son, Holy Ghost titles. And God knows, I teach that all the time because repetition is the best teacher. So if you say you're non-denominational, that can only mean you don't hold license with a denomination, because you're going to adopt the Catholics' way of looking at things, or the Baptists, or the Pentecostals, or the Methodists. So you see what I'm saying? You're going to be affiliated with somebody's teachings. The non-denominational stuff just means you don't have paperwork with the Catholics to minister. And you don't need it. You don't need a license. That's a bunch of hogwash. So if you're non-denominational, that means you don't believe in anything, including the Bible. Because every denomination has a form of teaching in Scripture. You get what I'm saying? So denomination stuff means you're affiliated with that denomination. But to say you're non-denominational means you don't believe in any type of religion. That would basically make you atheist. That is one of the most, and no offense, coconuts, I'm not trying to question your intelligence. I'm just saying it's a misunderstood term. I go to a Baptist church, or I don't go to a Baptist church actually. I visited a Baptist church before, and some of them say they're non-denominational. It just didn't make any sense to me. But anyway, I digress. Back to this. I just wanted to make that clear. To say you're non-denominational, if you misunderstand the term, yeah, okay. It's all right, though. It's all right, coconuts. They are real. Coconuts are
States
real.
in specific for over 3 decades. But why is anyone surprised? They openly chant death to America, death to Israel. They openly say Israel's the little Satan, but we're the big Satan. So I think at some point when people say this repeatedly, you believe their rhetoric and their actions back their rhetoric. This is a very dangerous regime. And the notion that they would ever possess nuclear weapons, that people that are willing to conduct those kinds of terrorist acts would ever possess a nuclear weapon.
Have a good day, Red Hood. I hope you come back.
And unacceptable. And it's not going to happen under President Trump.
By Friday,
So
I'll
ever
be
since
preaching and teaching again. So
since the
you should get a
Iranian nuclear
notification if you
program
subscribed and you hit
started,
all
and they basically
notifications.
blocked the IAEA
I'm pretty much taking the
and
rest of the
others
week
from
off.
doing the
So
inspections that would be
I'll be
required
back
in
on
order to
Friday.
monitor their use of
I got to
enriched
start
uranium.
getting my yard cleaned up, my
We've
house
had
cleaned up.
presidents,
For
Democrat and
17
Republican,
months, this is all I've
say
done,
that a
which I'm
Iranian
happy to
nuclear
do, and I
weapon
love
was
what I do,
unacceptable. But it
I
took
can't
President Trump
neglect
to
what I
actually
have.
do something about it. It shocks me to hear some of our colleagues suggest that there was not an imminent
Vendetta is in
threat
the house. Good to see you,
from an
Vendetta. How you
Iranian
doing
nuclear
today,
weapon.
buddy?
You and I both
Good evening
sat
to you.
in the same skiff on the Senate Intelligence Committee. We won't talk about the details, of course, but we knew that they continued to enrich to the point where they could produce a nuclear weapon within a specified time. There's some debate about how long that breakout would take, but the idea that an Iranian nuclear program did not present an imminent threat to the United States, to me, is just ludicrous. And I think it defies all evidence to the contrary. But do you think if they had acquired a nuclear weapon, that that would change the ability of the United States and our allies like Israel to deal with this nuclear-armed Iran?
I think if Iran ever acquired a nuclear weapon, they could very well use it, because given the theological nature of their decision-making. But just as problematic is they would have immunity. At that point, your options on what you could do about them would be quite limited, and their ability to hold the world hostage.
They'd be like North Korea, for example.
They'd be North Korea, but worse. They'd be better funded. They would at that point decide that they own the Straits of Hormuz forever, and everyone has to pay them a toll. And nuclear weapons, you can't do anything about it. They would be able to act with impunity. They would sponsor Hezbollah. They would sponsor Hamas. They would hyper-scale their efforts of global terrorism and completely try to drive us out of the region and ultimately destroy the state of Israel. That's what their goal would be, and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it because they have a nuclear weapon and would threaten to blow people up if you tried to move against them.
Notwithstanding the importance of denying Iran a nuclear weapon, I do applaud the president's attempt to try to use some diplomacy here in order to deny them access to the enriched uranium and their other weapons that they use against Israel and the West. But tell me, why do you think anything that the Iranian regime agrees to that they will comply with? What evidence is there that they will agree to anything that they ultimately will stick with?
Well, again, and that's why any deal with them you have to enter into it with clearly verifiable steps. So as an example, simply putting something on a
pretty
piece of
soon
paper
I'll be
is
doing
not
this in my
satisfactory.
bedroom where the air
You have to
conditioner
actually
is,
commit
'cause
to
it's gonna
doing it,
be
then you
too
have to
hot out
actually
here.
do it. And so that's our view of it. Our view of it is that any concessions that are made, and I don't even call them concessions per se, but any arrangements that are made with Iran have to come after not just they agree to certain things, but they actually do certain things. And let's be clear about this, because I don't think this is talked about enough. If what Iran wants is nuclear energy for their country, there are mechanisms to do it. There are countries all over the world that have nuclear energy, but they don't enrich. They certainly don't enrich the 60%. They don't do it hidden in a mountain, deep buried underground somewhere. If what they want is nuclear energy, they can have it. There are mechanisms for them. The problem with Iran is not that they want nuclear energy. The problem with Iran is that everything they do is consistent with the activities of a nation that seeks to develop a nuclear weapons capability.
Yeah, and even the term non-denomination, it's still, is it a misnomer?
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary,
or is
thank you
it,
for being here.
I
Tomorrow,
think
I'm
the word's
going to have
misnomer.
you
It's
in
like a
the
misunderstood
Appropriations
statement.
Committee, and we'll walk the list that we talked about a couple of weeks ago on a conference call, so I won't cover that. I want you to sort of answer the China watchers who saw that
you might not
visit
be
to China
with a denomination, but you're
saw
going to believe their
that
teaching.
NVIDIA is now going to sell
that's where it matters.
H200s. I understand that's not our highest technology, but it's better than what China has.
With my
and that's
definition.
why people are worried. And that, I mean, it's pretty plain that the president violated one of the 6 assurances. I understand that the ambassador and you and others have sort of followed up to kind of smooth the edges, but I mean, it's pretty clear. He says, we discussed arms sales in great detail. It depends on China. It's a very good negotiating chip for us. So what do you say to China watchers who say they got some pretty good deliverables and we didn't get much?
I don't see the trip. There were some deliverables, you know, the purchase of additional Boeing aircraft, which of course is beneficial to the Chinese as well, but helps our company, some of the agricultural concessions. But the trip was largely, for the most part, about the fact that the 2 largest, most powerful countries in the world have to have direct interaction with one another. And this was an opportunity to do it. He will reciprocate by visiting the United States later next year. Separate from that, and I don't know if you were here at the outset in my opening statement, or maybe it was in response to one of the questions, I think 2 things are clear. Number one is that we're entering into a period of strategic stability that I think serves the interest of both countries, because the last thing we want is a largely destabilizing event in the Indo-Pacific. But the second is that there are clear differences of priorities. There are clear irritants in that relationship that are longstanding and that are going to be long-term. Critical minerals dependencies, things of this nature. So it's one of those relationships that's going to require very deft diplomacy and mature decision-making.
Sure, and this is why I like our engagement. Like, that makes sense to me, but it seems to me that if the main objective is to kind of touch gloves and initiate conversations, then why give away any of the things that they're already seeking in exchange for essentially nothing? I mean, you're basically saying it's better to talk than not to. It's better to engage than not to. It's better to be in a period of stability than not. I agree with all that. I just don't understand why we would want to sell them our second best chips, and why we would start to at least complicate the question of our assurances regarding Taiwan. I'm going to move over. We're going to stay in the Asia-Pacific region. The Marshalls, the Philippines, and Tuvalu have declared a national emergency on their energy situation. South Korea says its energy crisis is a war-like situation. You've been around a long time on this committee and now as secretary. It is always the case that something in the Middle East undermines our ability to project power in the Asia-Pacific region. But it's not just a question of opportunity cost and attentional challenges. Now we're talking about our allies in the Asia-Pacific
In
region
the end, we're all Christian.
really taking
Catholic
it on the
Church is the
chin
one
with
that
energy
started
costs
all
because
these
of the
different
Strait of Hormuz.
denominations.
What do we say to them? Just
Before
hang
then,
in
it
there?
was the only
Yeah, no,
it was the
a couple
Apostles'
points.
Church.
It's one of the steps that we've taken and some of the
first
things that we've
century
done around the
church
world,
before
whether it's the
Catholicism
release of
was even
strategic
in
reserves,
existence.
whether it's not popular by,
And then they
got questions about
created
here earlier
all
today,
these harlot
but making
churches.
available for a limited
Revelation
period
chapter
of time,
17, that's just
both
not what I'm
Iranian
saying.
oil on the water, though they don't enjoy the revenue of it, and some of the Russian oil on the water as well. The third point, though, that this points to is a much deeper one, and that is that while the Straits of Hormuz provides about 20% of the global oil supply, it is probably 80 or 90% of the supply in the Indo-Pacific, given the geography and so forth. So one of the things that I think is going to come about as a result of all this in the long term is more diversification in where they're going to get their energy from, including from the United States potentially, certainly with Japan and some other countries in the region will benefit
But you know
from
that the sort of project
It takes
timeline-
time.
It all takes time. So
understood.
That's like cold comfort if you're running a country and your gasoline and your fertilizer and all your input prices just skyrocketed because of President Trump's decision to go to war with a country clear across the world.
But see, I don't, and I understand your point, but I also think in all these questions, we're getting a lot of questions about us. I don't think it's fair because ultimately, the people who have closed the Straits of Hormuz are Iran, and they're doing so in violation of every international law you can imagine. The Chinese are against it. Everyone is. We have, I think, a record number, 140 co-sponsors at the United Nations on this resolution that hasn't come up for a vote yet to condemn what they're doing and to
Look,
reopen
nobody's
the Straits.
defending what Iran is doing. I think what we're saying is this was not just predictable, it was predicted. This was what everybody said. You don't have to be some expert in foreign policy. You don't need to get into a skiff. You could literally put this into an LLM and say, what'll happen if we take kinetic action against Iran? And the first thing that would pop out is, well, they'll probably close the Strait of Hormuz. So it's really shocking to me the degree to which this administration expresses shock that the thing that everybody said was going to happen ended up happening.
But here's the point I would make on that, in that the reverse of that is, so that the alternative is to say, well, then we have to go ahead and let Iran develop a nuclear weapon or they'll close the Straits of Hormuz. I mean,
Yeah, it's
at
good
some
they
point
have
you have to take
activities
action
at
on this
churches.
situation,
It's
understanding there'll be a
important, especially
reaction
for the
to
young
it.
people.
But it cannot be. Iran will always have the ability to threaten the Straits. You don't need much sophistication to, if you threaten commercial vessels and shooting them, they're going to stop moving. Dropping mines, by the way, it's not just Iran that can do it. The Houthis could do it in the Red Sea, and they're not nearly as large as Iran is. I think this is a more fundamental challenge, and that is, are we now forever limited doing it? Do we just have to let Iran go ahead and develop a nuclear weapon because of their threat to close the Straits of Hormuz? That's an untenable situation.
Secretary Rubio, thank you.
But I'll see him tomorrow, so don't worry.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Tomorrow's approach.
I know we're supposed to have a hard stop at 12:30, but
No, we'll do it.
Senator
Let's go.
Cruz has been patient. I hope you'll give us
Only because it's him.
one
We'll do
more
it.
bite
Let's
of the
go.
apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say, Mr. Secretary,
Ted Cruz,
since
I was just talking about
you
him
left the
earlier.
Senate,
Love
I've been
Ted
obliged
Cruz.
to serve Cuban coffee in my meetings because you left me as the only Cuban American left behind. So come by if you want a cafecito. Let me start by saying that President Trump's decision to strike Iran was the most consequential decision of his second term as president. And I want to commend you, I want to commend the president and the entire administration on the extraordinary success we have seen. In less than 40 days, the United States has utterly and completely destroyed the military and nuclear infrastructure that the Iranian regime spent nearly 50 years building. Every day that passes increases American leverage. Iran is weaker, poorer, and more isolated than it's been in decades. The president has laid out 4 red lines for any resolution to this military conflict. Number one, that there be zero enrichment by Iran. Number two, that they hand over all of their enriched uranium. Number three, that they stop funding terrorism worldwide. And number four, that they open the Strait of Hormuz. I agree with all four of those red lines. Do you agree with those red lines? And how achievable do you believe they are in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, you stated the poor positions the president has taken accurately, and the entire administration is supportive of it because that's what we take our directives from the president, and personally, during my time in the Senate, these would be consistent with my thinking. I would only reverse it in the following order. The Straits of Hormuz, it would have to come first, because what they're doing there is unlawful and illegal to begin with. That has to open immediately. And that has to open immediately in exchange, not for anything else other than us lifting the blockade. We have a blockade on Iranian oil leaving. And the reason why we have a blockade on Iranian oil leaving is because they closed the Straits.
That's way more
If they open the Straits, and by open the Straits, understand what we're
me.
saying. It's saying you're not going to threaten to shoot at commercial vessels of civilians and create, ecological disaster. That's what they're doing. It's unlawful, it's illegal, it's outrageous. Every country in the world condemns it. If they end that, we lift the blockade. Then we enter into the second phase, which is the nuclear question. On enrichment, they don't have to, they don't need to enrich. If what they want is a nuclear energy program, they can have one without enrichment.
I think it is.
And it was somebody the other day, a few questions ago, I forgot who it was, said that what we're working on is similar to JCPOA. It is not. JCPOA would have expired this year. And it allowed them to keep all the enrichment equipment.
When your mother dies, you lose your best friend.
Clearly, that equipment to get them to 60 and 90%, because they've done it to 60% as a result of it. So it would have to deal with that question. And it would have to deal with the highly enriched uranium that they currently are in possession of. There's no reason to have, the only reason to have 60% enriched uranium is to turn it into 90% enriched uranium and put it into a weapon. So those remain, and on the sponsor of terrorism, absolutely. To the point where I would argue, for example, it's one of the interesting things that's happening, and I know Senator Shaheen has a great interest in Lebanon. It's one of the most ironic situations in the world. The Lebanese government and the Israeli government could do a peace deal tomorrow. Israel has no territorial claims in Lebanon. And Hezbollah is in particular, in fact, Hezbollah has called for the overthrow of the current Lebanese government.
Yeah, me too.
The impediment in Lebanon is the fact that Hezbollah has embedded itself into that country and is the reason for all the suffering that's happening there right now and all the suffering that's historically happened. Entirely funded, entirely controlled by Iran. There is no Hezbollah without Iran. There is no Hezbollah without Iran. I mean, there might be a political movement with ideology, but they don't have a bunch of rockets. They don't have a bunch of weapons without Iran. They are a complete, total proxy of Iran, and that's the kind of activity that needs to be.
I want to come back to Hezbollah in a moment, just focusing for a second on Iran itself. For some time, I have urged the administration, I've urged Israel to arm the protesters in Iran. I don't think it is fair to expect the Iranian people to stand up, protesters to stand up with rocks against soldiers with machine guns. Are we arming the protesters, and should we be?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any program to arm civilians in Iran to overthrow their government. I mean, there may be other countries doing it or other elements doing it, but certainly not the U.S. government.
All right, let's go back to Hezbollah. So you spoke with the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, over the weekend. The State Department sent out an email to journalists shortly after your call in which the State Department, a spokesperson, said, quote, Iran wants to prolong the conflict in Lebanon so it can claim credit for saving the day. I have to admit that didn't strike me as accurate. I don't think Iran wants to keep the conflict going in Lebanon. I think they desperately want Israel to stop killing Hezbollah.
I'm just curious.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the point I was trying to make is that we are trying to view the Lebanon-Israeli talks as separate and distinct from Iran. And what Iran wants to do is mix it all together. Because Hezbollah is not legitimate. There's a government in Lebanon. That's who we're dealing with. And Hezbollah is not their equal in terms of who we're going to be dealing with or who needs to be in charge. So the point we're trying to make is that is what Iran is trying to stymie. They are trying to stymie any effort in which Israel and Lebanon can work together and prolong it so that if an arrangement is reached at some point in the future, they can claim credit for having forced it through leverage. And that's why you see, for example, Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire about a week ago and then immediately violated.
Now I remember. I just had to see the number.
Within hours.
You would agree every Hezbollah terrorist that the IDF kills makes America safer?
Well, Hezbollah is a danger to the United States. There's no doubt about it. I think the question is, how do you do that? And how do you achieve the objective of demilitarizing and defanging Hezbollah while at the same time strengthening the legitimate government of Lebanon, and particularly the president and others. That's been the challenge there for a very long time. That remains the challenge now, of course. The capabilities of the LAF are not where they need to be. But there are also elements within the LAF that are not who they need to be, because they facilitate in some cases and cooperate with Hezbollah. So it's a very tricky situation. But I point you back to two things that have happened in the last few months. Number one, the Lebanese government expelled the Iranian ambassador because of Hezbollah. The Iranian ambassador says, I'm not leaving, and you can't make me. Okay, that's number one. The second thing that's happened is just a week ago, Hezbollah openly called, they openly called for the overthrow of the Lebanese government. So no one here should be under any, Hezbollah is not just an enemy of Israel and an enemy of America. Hezbollah is an enemy of Lebanon and of the Lebanese people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Rubio, you've been very generous with your time. We appreciate that. For the information of the members, the record will remain open until the close of business tomorrow, June 3rd. With that, the committee is adjourned.
And with that, My Schreiber Ministries is adjourned. If you haven't subscribed yet before we go, please do. Unless there's some major war situation, I most likely won't be back till Friday. I'm not going to guarantee that. But I got some things I really need to focus on in my house, like, getting it organized again. It's not so much dirty, it's just unorganized. Bachelor's pad, you might say. A bear cave. So, all right, everybody. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I will see you again on Friday, if not before. This was interesting. It was very informative, and Marco Rubio, as a champion that he is, absolutely handled it like a pro. So, guys, thanks for being here, and never forget that Jesus Christ is our great God and Savior.